Scan complete. Analysis concludes that the data we have collected in approximation over the past 4 years, it is likely to confirm that
this is not enough information!
better late than never is becoming less of a phrase and more of a prophecy by this point, I'm telling you. Whether it would be the atmospheric settings that best relates to the area you're exploring, the wide assortment of suit upgrades and weapons you obtain throughout your journey exploring further into the vast regions of the planet's surface, the jaw-dropping evolution into 3D first-person shooter platformer that gives it a much more greater perspective of what the Metroid universe feels like from the protagonist to the player, or the amount of lore scattered throughout the game that, in turn, gives it so much more variety from the story it has to tell for the player to get a better, clear justification to what exactly is going on, and how you, a badass female intergalactic bounty hunter, can do to unleash the power within your highly advanced arsenal and put an end to whatever has caused the disaster to happen in the first place. There is always something to love about what truly makes the Metroid series so great to all that loves and appreciates it. Starting back from the moment of discovering the true identity of Samus Aran, putting the world in a state of shock and disbelief upon witnessing the supposed masculine character they controlled turned out to be a woman all along, marking the start of a brand new era in the video game industry back in the classic NES days. And the message, "See you next mission," could not have felt any more exciting to find out what was in store for Samus's future. And ever since that day, the graphics evolved, gameplay received more variety, the settings grew more dark and disturbing, the genre changed completely out of fucking nowhere, making everything feel more advanced in quality and perspective even better than ever before. My absolute favorite feature that the series has been gifted is the scan visor. An extraordinarily useful tool used more commonly to gather information and research everything you analyze, whether it be objects to give the universe more diversity and aesthetic appeal, devices and terrain inscripted with lore for intriguing narratives, or creatures to analyze their natural instincts and behavior for how to deal with them in a one-to-one combat situation. The scan visor is so damn amazing that it does an excellent job as a teacher for education. I've honestly learned a lot more from this thing than anything else that I was taught in school, because unlike the overwhelming standardized tasks to perform and prove how knowledgeable we are as a person with letters to judge our goddamn IQ, the scan visor gives you all of the information that you need to be successful because of how exquisitely well detailed everything is written out to understand. It cuts to the chase, plain and simple, take notes. With all of these magnificent proportions to describe everything of what best defines the Metroid series, I am more than honored to say that it is, in my opinion, the greatest franchise of all of Nintendo's creations. And if it wasn't for Retro Studios to step up to the spotlight, then it wouldn't have received the upgrades it got from the Prime series in the first place. Though prior to the monumental success of Dread, the Metroid series by itself was criminally underrated for reasons that have never been established. Despite Samus being part of the original 12 playable characters in Smash Bros. And continued to represent Metroid's legacy onward up to Ultimate. Which obviously leads up to the fact that Nintendo has shown its importance toward the series of Metroid, and quite possibly acquired the realization of the potential it can get over the years. Well, one thing is for certain, it did just that. Still doesn't change the fact that despite the agonizingly disappointing fact of Samus Returns not having as much sales in the long run, even if it was the key solution to reviving a dead franchise, and actually gave us the new Metroid game we've always wanted, that's not Metroid's Funko Pop adventure. Perhaps back then, the fans have disbanded and decided to forget about the series altogether and move on to something else that's not going to eventually result as a disappointment for them. I, on the other hand, have always been a huge fan of every game ever created and enjoyed the most out of the gameplay experiences, gimmicks, stories, and more importantly, the boss battles it had waiting for me to uncover and receive an incredibly high amount of satisfaction and pleasure for each one I fought, no matter the cost of how bad or good the game was. Logically speaking though, I personally believe that when it comes to the idea of boss fights, Metroid ranks the most supreme out of any other video game series I have ever played in my life so far as a gamer. Some turned out to be okay, some are pretty entertaining to fight with a few minor exceptions that keeps it from being good, and then there's a kind that just makes me go, yes please. I have been putting so much thought into arranging this list for what my overall favorite Metroid boss fights were going to be. And because there are so many great boss fights in Metroid, with fantastic concepts, designs, creativity, and enjoyment you get while fighting them, it was extremely tough to select only just 10 that I consider to be a favorite. So now that it's finally been put into play for me to include in this countdown video, I will now announce my top 10 favorite Metroid bosses. I will be listing at least one boss from each game in the series. I will be talking about how it leads up, concepts it has, the experiences I've had with them, and what makes them enjoyable to fight in the first place. Of course, since this is a video featuring every main Metroid game released so far, spoilers are to be expected in here, so fair warning. The only exceptions I have are AM2R, which is a fan game, and Metroid Prime Pinball, which is a spin-off. Also, I will not be including any mini-bosses, so things like Caretaker Class Drone, Hive Mecha, Spore Spawn, the Metroid Evolutions, and Arachnus are off the list. I am GBA049, and with that finally out of the way, Chozo Varia Suit online, energy at max, ammunition at full capacity, commencing mission now.
Time to begin the countdown!
Judging by the large fraction of games released to commemorate the birth of any next generation's consoles, there's always that one key ingredient that specific game can have to ultimately revolutionize the industry of video games. Metroid Prime is one of those many cases that arrived on the GameCube to define evolution in the most brilliantly innovative way possible that goes beyond comprehension. Changing the genre entirely is what it has done to perform that very task that was guaranteed to be a worldwide success that would undoubtedly acquire the award for one of the greatest games of all time for years to come. Even after 2 decades, Metroid Prime is still considered to be one of the best titles recognized in gaming history, according to all that were in the front line to witness the sudden burst of evolution for the franchise. On the other hand, Metroid Prime Hunters did something similar to the idea of Metroid Prime by replicating the action-adventure FPS platformer genre entirely for a handheld system as one of the launch titles for the Nintendo DS. I gotta say, this game is quite the ideal factor of having the physical capabilities comprised to allow those specified genres embedded into it that surprisingly works for the DS's hardware. For a DS game, Metroid Prime Hunters is pretty amazing. I like how everything flows so perfectly to visualize the aesthetically improved Metroid qualities in DS graphics. Hell, most of the soundtracks even consist of ones reused from the original Metroid Prime titles, in addition to keeping the flow of the vibes for isolation and confliction as you progress further onwards in each area of the Tetra Galaxy, all while seeking the source of so-called ultimate power that you learn about from a telepathic message in your ship, taking the necessary precautions of discovering who or what could possibly be behind this mysterious message and what it truly means. Meanwhile, the rest of the other bounty hunters that received the exact same message took no heed whatsoever and immediately joined the case to fulfill their own ambitions for this ultimate power, thus beginning the mission of who will be the first to obtain it and become the most powerful bounty hunter in the galaxy. Or so they think. As you make your way forward in the game, you will come across these floating blue transparent figures scrambled throughout each planet called data shades. Data that's only visible with the scan visor containing pieces of lore about the Limbic tribe, an indigenous race that has vanished and turned extinct for reasons unknown. Each lore that you find is categorized by a set mixed proportion of the Limbic's history, their strong sense of intellectual properties, used for self-defense against potential invasions, and the war that has scarred the Tetra Galaxy, utterly demolishing their once prosperous civilization, wrought forth by a ravenous entity known as Goria. Goria first appeared as a comet as it struck the Limbic cluster, emerging out as a gas until it mimicked the shape of the natives it has single-handedly brought to an end. No matter what the Limbics could do to counter against Goria, all efforts were fruitless, and their entire arsenal was now being used against them by it, growing exponentially more powerful at a devastating rate as it continued to annihilate everything in its path across the galaxy. This ordeal resulted in the construction of the Seal Sphere, an artifact built by the Limbic Elders that holds the necessary capabilities for the race's final resolve of containing Goria after their near grave mistake of attempting to destroy it. Within the Seal Sphere contains the very essence of the remaining Limbic survivors that also wields their psionic energy used to give power to it. With Goria bound by the power of the Seal Sphere, the Limbics devised a plan where it cannot escape nor be released by accident. To prevent any misleading cause for Goria's potential chances of escaping, the Limbic Order sent the ensnared entity inside their prison known as the Oubliette. Realizing in further notice that the plan needed extra attachments, they used the Limbic cannon to open a rift in space and transport the Oubliette inside an alternate dimension known as the Infinity Void. To further prevent the reactivation of the cannon, 8 of the necessary keys for gaining control of it, known as octoliths, each containing the essence of an Limbic Elder, were scattered throughout each planet of the Tetra Galaxy. In addition to being heavily guarded and secured by the Limbic's most powerful and goddamn infuriating technology, each one located inside separate alternate dimensional areas led by a portal, which are also secured by 3 Limbic artifacts hidden around each area of the planet, to hedge their bet even further. In other words, an invincible apocalyptic creature came out of nowhere and devastated the race inhabiting the galaxy, nearly wiped them clean to extinction, took their bait from the Seal Sphere, and they have quite literally imprisoned a prison for its prisoner. I think it's safe for me to further emphasize and come to the point that the Limbic tribe wasted absolutely no time at all for allowing any more damage being dealt by one creature that met their league, and sacrificing their entire race as the expense required to fulfill their foolproof plan of imprisonception into complete successful fruition. That is quite the fucking commitment if I've ever seen one. Holy shit. Okay, time to finally mark that off the list. Back to the telepathic message from earlier. The primary key objective to deciphering the truth of ultimate power is to collect and gather all 8 octoliths needed to restore function to the Olympic Cannon and gain access to the oubliette inside the Infinity Void. After giving an existential crisis via early arthritis to anyone simultaneously abusing their touchscreen and L button to the point of numbness, in a game where standard variables and coding that normally show mercy when followed result in instant death, all the while forced to deal against the most fucking aggravating enemy swarms with escape sequences aplenty. Surprisingly fluid controls, once you get used to them. Okay, GameSpot, whatever you say. Although despite the finger-breaking controls and uninspired boss designs with repetitive concepts from the Limbic's main center defensive security protocols, the story reaching toward the conclusion behind Goria itself is actually the only exception I have for ideas relating to what makes a boss fight for Metroid good enough for what it does well with. You get to this point receiving the message of ultimate power as you progress your way inside the Celestial Archives, wanting to know more of what's going on, which doesn't happen until you arrive on Alinos, the home planet of the Olympic tribe. From that point forward, everything is starting to become full circle as you learn more about them and their ordeal they've dealt with against Goria that costed their own existence to put the enemy in chains inside an alternate dimension for eternity. Knowing now that this Goria is no ordinary foe that Samus is soon going to encounter eventually for herself. It gradually becomes more and more foreboding from those creepy telepathic messages you receive constantly for each octolith you obtain, feeling like as if that they're coming from the deceased natives of the Olympic Elders. Likewise, the essences of them are resonating from within the octoliths, and their consciousness still remains. It's those simple, short words written out, and the disturbing noises you get coming from those messages to make you feel uneasy and wonder if you're doing the right thing. A sense of despair being brought to you from the Limbic Elders, explaining to become fully prepared for what is about to unfold as you progress. Those elements begin to flesh out from each other as you make your way inside the Infinity Void and board the very prison where Goria resides. Upon entering this mysterious overgrown area, you discover more data shades inside a chamber all grouped up together listing the last pieces of lore from the Limbics sealing Goria. The first one saying that it cannot be destroyed. But does it have a weak spot? After gathering this last bit of information to store in the archives, you head down a narrow hallway leading to a giant blast door equating to the same ones found inside the Octolith chambers and descend to the drop-down chamber where the moment of truth is revealed. The moment you do, however, you encounter the 6 main bounty hunters who are seen firing at a large spherical structure atop a pillar, eager to claim their prize of ultimate power. The structure breaks open, and the prisoner held within its incarceration is released, witnessing in horror as they realize that they received much more than what they've bargained for. Immediately after it reawakens, Goria strikes down all of the bounty hunters single-handedly by impaling them with its tentacles, knocking them all out unconscious, and regains its form in the final confrontation in a conflicting scenario where the quest of searching for the ultimate power was a trick. That's what I love the most about this fight. The fact that the entire plot of Metroid Prime Hunters focuses on the final boss. From the moment you open up the game with the hidden Easter egg of its transitional silhouette appearing for a split second that I hinted at earlier, up until it leads to the shocking conclusion of nothing but complete deception. The true meaning behind the source of ultimate power is none other than Goria itself. The telepathic message that was passed on across the galaxy was its scheme for luring the bounty hunters into the Olympic cluster in an attempt to be broken free from its imprisonment. Holy shit, this thing is smart. For a final boss, it's essentially the entire idea for both the story and the objective of the whole game Goria by itself is a very unique concept that gets every important characteristic of a Metroid boss correctly. It may still suffer from the subjective specifications of the controls, since you need to rely without a lock-on feature to fight it. But at least the experiences in my perspective were enough to keep me engaged and ready to bring this robotic shape-shifting menace down, despite me already knowing that it can't be destroyed, save for its arms, which are less durable in defenses, but will regenerate after a short amount of time passes before the second one is blown off. In the process of disassembling the arms, Goria uses a variety of the same weapons utilized by the 6 hunters it has taken out and harnessed for itself to use against you. Candid's Volt Driver, Silex's Shock Coil, Noxus's Judicator, Spyros' Magmaul, Weevil's Battle Hammer, and Trace's Imperialist, changing colors corresponding to the weapon it has assimilated, each bearing the same strengths and weaknesses from the same hunter it was used by. It's also interesting that the music constantly switches between the battle theme of the hunters each time when Goria changes color that matches their weapons, making this boss a force to be reckoned with, especially since the battleground is surrounded by electrifying terrain that can deplete your health very quickly if you make direct contact, in addition to Goria's deadly arsenal constantly pushing you straight into it while you're busy struggling to avoid its attacks with limited mobility. When both arms are removed in quick succession, Goria will float up in the air to regenerate by drawing power from the Seal Sphere. And by this point, the formerly identified hellish nightmare war machine of unknown origin, once seen as an invincible genocide dispenser, is now officially an enemy gifted with a flaw. One that has been bestowed from the Limbic Order for eternal containment procedures. The same artifact holding the very spirits of the sacrificed, securing its prisoner millennia ago. The Seal Sphere has fused with Goria's cellular structure and has now become its very first and only weakness. But that doesn't mean Goria has lost its physical prowess of fighting. Oh no. Far from it, actually. It may be left vulnerable to attack, but it still has, well, one very nasty attack to use against you. While the Seal Sphere is open for damage, a large orange tendril will emerge out and try to grab onto you. If you get caught by its grasp, you'll be tossed in the air around the room like a rag doll before being thrown back down on the ground, left with tremendous amounts of HP depleted. Avoiding this attack is ideal since health energy units are scarce to obtain from the trochas seen lying around the room, which Goria can get a hold of for itself and use them as projectiles. After a decent set of times repeating the same process of removing the arms and damaging the Seal Sphere, Goria will collapse, and the classic Metroid escape sequence ending formula cliche will commence. Why does everything that Samus steps foot under always have to self-destruct? And congratulations! You've solved the case of ultimate power, destroyed the evil menace lurking within the Limbic Cluster, and restored peace to the galaxy. At the cost of your own life, anyway. A job well done! You have performed admirably once again, Samus Aran. Mission complete. Or is it? That mildly unsettling design mission final screen could not appear to be any more blatantly obvious that it isn't. Especially from this genuinely intriguing final form time counter shown on the bottom left. So what's the catch? In actuality, this is only the neutral ending of the game. You didn't fully achieve your mission completely. The path to the true ending lies within the multicolored triangular-shaped objects. 2018. Good times. Seen on the outskirts around Goria's chamber. And I assure you, these things aren't placed for decoration. Rewind back to the very first blast door you came across at the landing site to the Celestial Archives from the moment your quest begins. From here and throughout the rest of your adventure, you will notice these peculiar blue emblems hanging above certain blast doors found in different parts of the Tetra Galaxy. Each emblem bears its own data shade, deciphering another piece of listed lore titled the Limbic Prophecy. categorized and arranged in numerical order from each emblem you discover onwards throughout your journey. Each data shade translated by the scan visor contains data log entries written out metaphorically that hints the type of beam upgrades by keywords relating to its color. After acquiring this very last bit of important information, proceed back to the oubliette and face off against Goria once more, this time by interacting with the devices in the same order as foretold in the prophecy. Yellow lightning for the Volt Driver, green wood for the Battle Hammer, orange blaze for the Magmal, so on and so forth. Once the sequence is complete, a telepathic message shall be brought over to you via gunship transmission indicating that the Alembic prophecy has been fulfilled, and manifestation will take action once Goria is brought down to 0, until witnessing the ultimate power from within the Alembic tribe officially takes root. Now this is more like it! Once the devices unleash its energy straight onto the barely functional chaotic menace, you are transported in the secret lair within the oubliette, high atop a large spiral-like tree structure in a scene where the final boss has been dwarfed down to size, appendages no longer intact with its body, essences from the seal sphere are no longer present, and is now a part molded within Goria's body that is transformed into its permanent weak spot. Powers reduced, defenses lowered, and ready to be sent into the afterlife. Abilities regress down to near nothing as it is seen constantly teleporting around the room and firing out lasers and molten rocks that pierce through terrain, completely acting like a coward in a desperate attempt to kill you, but with inconsiderable results. But it still holds the standard qualities of having invincible properties, so none of the most powerful weapons stored in your arsenal can damage it. All but one. What lies beneath the very bottom of the arena contains the Alembic's most prized possession. A weapon of mass destruction that was considered an abomination by the elders, fearing the damage it could cause to anyone sane enough to utilize for themselves. The Omega Cannon. The key. The answer. The meaning. The true source of ultimate power is the weapon shaped into creation to obliterate the bloodthirsty, dreadful walking apocalypse of lifeless ambition. Oh, how the tables have turned! I find the conclusion of the final fight against Goria to be incredulously satisfying. Because in all seriousness, I never knew about Goria having a final form until I actually had the thought of arranging this list to begin with. I saw footage of it myself and thought it looked downgraded and anticlimactic for a final boss's true form. Maybe it was the graphics or something, I don't know. But all that I could say right now is I assumed incorrectly. Everything about Goria is fantastic. The fact that it's the whole story of Metroid Prime hunters from every piece of lore arranged by the Alembic tribe, the characteristics that it has to classify its threat level for the entire universe, the plethora of intelligence it has to bait and switch its victims across the galaxy via telepathic gunship transmissions to lure them inside its prison and release the change in a form of contradiction. And finally, Goria went from a nightmarish, war-driven, merciless entity to a floating, defenseless joke. Wow. Never in my life would I have thought that the key to discovering the secret for the final form of an all-devouring apocalyptic creature of unknown origin would actually lead up of interacting with a bunch of giant fidget spinners. But hey, if this is the only optimal boss fight available that isn't 4 of the same repetitive fights with acne-covered mechanical watchtower dicks or giant flying boobs that doesn't give me total finger dismemberment, I'll take what I can get. If anyone ever asked me what my favorite game among the list of a specific series was, the answer I'd give them would subjectively contribute the polar opposite of the spectrum than what a decent majority stands for in sticking with games that are considered the most popular. Nothing for me to contradict their opinions, because I still have a genuine experience playing those types of games as well, like everyone else does. Personally for me, however, I'm rather the type of individual that's more biased and passionate toward the category of underrated titles, more so because certain sequels introduce more methods and overall interesting ideas that transcends what its predecessor didn't achieve as much as the newer model has attained the most out of. Metroid Prime 2 Echoes is the definitive sequel of the trilogy that goes more in depth in deriving suspenseful atmosphere that progressively starts to encase everything in an irrevocable manifestation of ravenous dark sentience.
A game where all signs of hope is starting to grow more dim until the transmutation of life's meaning is slowly reaching its inevitable demise and revitalize into nothing but an empty shell lying in grief, taking the path of acceptance and molding what it never wanted on its tomb. History. An insufferable, demanding wish that was nearly granted until a star shone down from the heavens and permeated through the darkness like a knife powered with a prayer implored by mercy. It fought. It struck down. It persevered throughout its journey, having a commitment to protect what it held most dear, until reversal by laying siege against evil was brought to justice. And therefore, the star, formerly identified as the intergalactic bounty hunter, Samus Aran, achieved the impossible, and has attained all of which she was assigned to fulfill to earn the title as a true hero. The Light of Aether, reborn as the Chosen One.
Apologies for my excessive deviations by writing novels. But as much as I love Metroid Prime 2 Echoes as my favorite game of all time, because of what I clarified in rational explanations, albeit in truth only a small chunk of what makes it truly stand out as a legendary masterpiece to my eyes, the introduction for one of the most iconic doppelgangers ever made in all of gaming is another reason behind it. Generally speaking, these types of characters are more widely classified as an obstacle attempting to overshadow the protagonist by copying every aspect behind their abilities and demonstrates every action it presents, only to further prove themselves as the superior model of the original. In this case, Dark Samus does all of this in a quintessential factor by simply being there, and each fight against her, or it, really makes the battle stand out for how much intelligence it's gained since the last encounter, and therefore show how powerful it's gotten. The first fight against Dark Samus starts off with an epic scene about good and evil staring down at each other in a mirrored vigilant gesture before Judgment, commencing a test of strength, begins to take action. This fight makes up for a really great starting point for introducing Dark Samus' character in one-on-one combat. However, in logical specifications, the second fight against Dark Samus is arguably my favorite among the rest in the series. After acquiring the necessary artillery weapons obtained from the Spider and Power Bomb Guardian respectively, the next objective leads you into the northern side of the main gyro chamber via Spider Ball track on the second ring from the gyroscope structure. A one-way entrance through the glass containing the re-encounter with your dark twin. Immediately upon entering through the blast door, a group of several dark pirate troopers are shown through a giant glass window engaged in combat, all of which are instantaneously wiped out effortlessly by Dark Samus' attack, laughing sinisterly at their thoughtless actions by attacking something that is ways above their league, proceeding to the Phazon canisters and absorbs its contents to increase its power levels further. What interests me the most about this scene is that the room actually sets itself on lockdown for a brief moment, as if it was made for both the intention of forcing the delivery of demonstrating Dark Samus's character as something that's not to be taken lightly in the slightest to the player, and also to give off those elements of apprehension, as it is literally feet away from your sights, in the opposite side of a small room. The shutters do not open until Dark Samus approaches the Phazon canisters. When that happens, one of them begins to slowly open by itself, leading into a small storage room for preparation.
The noises emanating from Dark Samus's absorbing abilities can still be heard through the second shutter, like it's set up for a sudden encounter, emerging so abruptly as soon as the shutter slowly reveals the very room where Dark Samus once resided.
I feel like I was experiencing something from a horror game rather than Metroid, because this entire sequence goes surprisingly well with those kinds of qualifications. I'm impressed, but nothing could possibly compare to the actual fight, especially back in the time when I was once stuck at this point of the game, since the hints given to you for the next destination to progress didn't help at all, because all I saw was a very small shaped map hologram highlighted blue that was shown nearly placed on the top of the screen, assuming that it took place somewhere high above the surface. So what's a better way to receive the final answer by entering inside a technologically advanced alternate dimension-like area of Luminoth design that doesn't look like anything from Aether, and have a second duel with your dark twin on a gigantic elevator leading to the skies?
Beacon received.
A message from Dark Samus. Okay, Metroid Prime, you have my attention, and boy am I glad to respond. And here it is. Round 2 with Dark Samus commences, as it activates the interface module to power on the elevator with manual force, because screw scan visors apparently. Logically, unlike the rest, the second battle against Dark Samus is the perfect example to quintessentially demonstrate a doppelganger evolved to become more like the protagonist in terms of strengths and abilities. In this case, Dark Samus attains all of this by including a new variety of attacks in its disposal, but more innovative and extreme than the original models. Dark Samus still holds the other attacks used in the battle before previously, but this time, it has now gained the Boost Ball ability, enabling it to move around the room at blinding speeds that makes lock-on difficult, obliterating every breakable object around the airy structure. A sweeping blue laser beam attack with the same environment destructive properties fires out a burst of Phazon energy with freezing capabilities, and when it sustains past half health, develop a new ability of turning invisible while continuously launching charged bursts of halting Phazon, requiring the use of the Dark Visor to keep track of where it is, ending in a dramatic, satisfying finisher as Dark Samus starts to lose control of its mobility in frustration as it begins to walk toward the side of the area, shatters the glass wall of the elevator, and plummets down to the bottom of the abyss, disintegrating into bioluminescent matter before vanishing into nothingness, soon to arrive back once again, reborn and revitalized into something completely different after absorbing a lethal amount of Phazon, altering its appearance considerably into a transparent and ghastly figure, demanding revenge for the final showdown.
In an unstable arena slowly deteriorating as a planet of darkness is on the brink of destruction, a battle where time is its most powerful weapon used against you. Do or die.
Honestly, as much as the final fight against Dark Samus was overall a great way to finish the game, subjectively speaking, the quality standard of the term final boss didn't really do all that much justice compared to what the mutated Emperor Ing did with better. Although, coincidentally, as ironic enough as it already is, everything leading up to the second fight against Dark Samus literally escalates perfectly.
Can't go wrong with a boss battle facing off against your clone in this type of setting, because elevators always hit the top.
I think we can all agree on one thing. A statement that is objectively classified as an extremely influential addition that best defines a perfect video game villain, based in accordance with what they have done to cause affliction in the inauguration of its capabilities to rightfully earn that title. And Ridley is by far the greatest example of a perfect villain a video game could ever possibly come up with. Although, I wouldn't really confirm him as the best one ever made, since there are others out there that I have yet to see and experience. But for now, Ridley is my favorite. On a canonical view anyway. Formidability-wise, however, is what demonstrates him as one that never gives up to achieve his ambition of destroying all whom he holds a permanent grudge on. And he will most definitely achieve this by expressing his personality as a bloodthirsty, merciless, and demented murderer by viciously killing his victim and relish the sights of their own lifeless metal corpse. Logically speaking, because of this, Ridley would not be the best guy to hang out with. So, what do you like to do for fun? Interesting. If there is one thing that intrigues me the most about Ridley's character as a villain, other than his tenacious personality traits that holds a perfect representation of classifying him as a redeemable icon of the Metroid franchise in general, it would have to be his widely famous liability of always returning back from the dead no matter what happens to him. Because apparently, he has regenerative properties built into his life support systems. I suppose this concludes the idea of the space pirate army serving loyalty to their leader with so much prestigious vigor and cerebral authority that losing their leader would result in miserable failure to them, with no other possible solution left to rectify their indomitable desires. Which also explains why there is a whole variety of battles withheld against Ridley seen throughout each game in the series. Except for Prime 2, they had something going for him during early development. Naturally, for this particular subspecies of our beloved space pirate leader Turosaur for me to select, would none other have to be the rejuvenated model of Meta Ridley from Metroid Prime 3 Corruption.
Chaos was slowly reaching to an irrevocable closure as the Galactic Federation facility on Norian had its planetary defense systems severed into a permanent state of weakness. That the revival of the protagonist's false image formed a scheme to oppose every source of life in an exploitation of regressing everything that it despises to be reincarnated into naught but a transmutation of its own blood. A heartless ambition for nourishment held accountable through mind manipulation, controlling an armada of space pirate warships, destroying every one of their internal thought processes and replacing it with the mind of an empty, heartless, obedient slave to serve and worship their new supreme ruler, and thus grant its wish of total control over the entire galaxy, an era where fear itself will thrive for all eternity, life deteriorating into the void of ravenous, sentient, merciless corruption. And the best way for allowing all of this to take root is to get rid of the problem that holds the power of preventing all evil intentions from being brought into fruition. From within the stolen armada lies the very leader of the space pirates, now being forced with a commitment, sent out to the battlefield for the purpose of interfering with the warrior's goal.
And this second variation of Meta Ridley holds the perfect job to do just that. First encountered as an obstacle trapping Samus inside the Morph Ball tunnel segment leading to the entrance of Generator C, therefore preventing access. Aiming small blasts of plasma directly through the structure wherever she's located before striking with his mouth to capture her. requiring the use of deploying morph ball bombs to break free from his grasp and clear the path obstructed by his leg, arriving back again, this time with less space to work with. After navigating through a series of morph ball tunnel passages, reactivating Generator C back online, Samus exits out of the hatch on top of the generator structure and encounters Meta Ridley in such an unexpected twist that the fight actually begins to take action immediately as both characters are sent down into a gigantic pit, falling straight to their death. Remember what I mentioned earlier about getting rid of the problem? Because that is exactly of what's going on in this fight. The task forcefully given to Meta Ridley's now total corrupted mind by Dark Samus went from aiding the assault on the planetary facility, incarcerating Samus on the spot directly toward where her destination was headed, using physical force to finish the job, and then molding into a fucking interloper by ambushing Samus's presence with literally no time to properly prepare or even expect for a fight to take action in short notice. But something like this? A dramatic scene of falling down through a 17,000 meter limit shaft with your corrupted nemesis is intense enough on its own right. But the fact that all of this occurs in the beginning of the game is even more surprising. Although, because of these reasons, it's a relatively easy fight to begin with. Or should I say, one that is considered to be, quite literally, straightforward. This spontaneous fight held against Meta Ridley is so jarring in every form of quality that's witnessed that it perfectly contributes everything all about him as a villain sent to kill the protagonist. His newly acquired commitment gifted to terminal corruption by Dark Samus's manipulation is still held manageable with his natural instincts, enough to the point where he elusively devises a scheme for himself. A plan for him having important business to attend to by handling the given situation personally. And what was this plan of his? Sacrifice. Dark Samus knew how tough Samus truly is in melee combat. And so the most favorable way of destroying her would none other be than to allow her nemesis to rectify his ambitious responsibility of destroying his sworn nemesis by ambushing her when she least expected it, and create a fight between hero against villain, justifying the odds as they are sent falling to their doom, proposing the solution to be maintained, all entirely meant to buy themselves time and allow the Leviathan seed to impact straight onto the facility on Norian like a meteor, killing everyone on board, thus beginning the stages of Phazon corruption to emerge and spread throughout the planet. In other words, the fight against Meta Ridley is sent as a diversion to Samus's critical objective to be led straight down into failure by him willing to achieve their success by sacrificing his own life to finish off Samus right then and there. All formed in the setting of, I'm taking you down with me. Starting off with you chasing after your nemesis, falling at a tremendous rate of velocity as Meta Ridley is seen far below your sights, firing a giant sweeping blast of plasma, all while scraping off chunks of debris to break your momentum. And since you're falling down so quickly, touching the walls can deal damage to you. When you manage to reach up closer, Meta Ridley's mouth will glow a slight orange color to indicate his time of vulnerability before he fires at you. If you're too close to him, however, he'll suddenly lunge forward and strike with his mouth, dealing a massive amount of health lost. After sustaining a decent amount of damage, Meta Ridley will swoop in and grab you, a new sequence where Samus now lies trapped inside Ridley's grasp. In this phase, Meta Ridley will proceed to throw out a series of physical attacks, all of which are accumulated into a red glow of charged energy before striking, requiring precisely aimed shots to cancel them out and temporarily stun him to break free. Through there, the tables have turned and the situation has changed from hero after villain to the exact opposite, flying down to reach you by firing either a stream of small fireball projectiles that circle toward you, or launch a gigantic slow-moving orange fireball that detonates on contact, sometimes which are sent out both at once. Once Meta Ridley's health reaches zero, Samus dives in for the Hail Mary and lands on his head to mercilessly fire shots of energy straight into his mouth as the finishing blow before a miracle saves her life from imminent death. Who apparently gained the mysterious ability of the Sixth Sense.
Seriously, how did Rundus find out that Samus fell into the generator shaft to begin with anyway? I probably shouldn't question it. As much as Minna Ridley's lower jaw is extremely asinine and distracting to look at on his Prime 3 graphics model, the fight leading and occurring out of nowhere with him definitely makes up with more than his original counterpart previously in the first Metroid Prime. Okay, I finally managed to collect and gather every chosen artifact to open the path leading to the supposed source of great poison as foretold on the walls. Oh, now I remember why I arrived at Talon 4 in the first place.
Ugh, stop leaving, you metaphysical flying piece of plot armor.
The Power Suit. A symbolic attribute of a warrior with prestigious authority, gifted by the hands of avian clairvoyance, who has long since been extinguished from the archives of history, fragmented into nothing but a memory, gone but not forgotten, worn by a lone solitary soldier from a military organization who has parted ways for a cause held only by a vindictive purpose, now rests in isolation after the unthinkable begins to merge into the gestation period of an ordeal, as Samus lies in a state of unconsciousness. An event from a simple planetary investigation instantaneously changed into a fight for survival, caused by the mortal, infectious, and corrosive parasite, X. The ability to copy and morph into the shape of its victim, who has fallen to their internal attack, seeking knowledge at the cost of one's own life it has mercilessly severed. It was there that a miracle in the shape of revolution, surviving the catastrophe of mass genocide, resides in the glass as the only cure required to deny such a fate upon entering through the afterlife. As the needle from the vaccine injected through the flesh of the victim's body induced the comatose state, identity of a familiar organism dispersed through the veins, and the multiplied invasion melted out of existence, therefore receiving the gift of a new life, but in dismay, also gifted with a curse. An expense so insufferable that it regressed someone, now formerly something less than who they once were before. The title of a legendary lone warrior of the galaxy, known to all, diminishing into a vulnerable being of weakness. All that the ancient disease deliberately left behind and took with it, the very source withholding her image after it was surgically removed and sent into an area of quarantine, which suddenly began to gain a form of sentience. The menace leaking from within started to grow, multiplying in gargantuous numbers at an exponential rate, until the chains of imprisonment broke off. The chamber of containment was savagely blown to oblivion, attaining the gestation period, giving birth to a second doppelganger that life could not avoid its creation, in horror shrieking its name, SAX, burying the eyes of malice, showing no mercy, holding an ambition for nothing but to kill, releasing the rest of its kind, seeping through every known whereabout across the station. All creatures, crew members, and their most prized valuable specimens were wiped out and sent into the realm of death, The Biologics Space Laboratories Research Station, once owned by the Galactic Federation, has now been taken over and ravaged by the tenacious nature of a parasite, where nothing is safe, even for its recent victim, who has suffered a tragic loss of defenses, now reduced to near zero, obtaining a horrific obligation of entering where fear itself resides. A test of survival and wits, unknowing to perceive that her life now hangs by a thread, weak and fragile, in excruciating expenses due to misfortune crawling from within her. The curse she received made her obtain the very DNA of a Metroid, therefore granting her their abilities and greatest weakness: cold. A critical side effect to the vaccine that has saved her life, and what her second apparition is fully armed with, along with every other powerful weapon in her arsenal, that will undoubtedly engrave the tombstone of Samus Aran. A mission so horrifying that it forever shall be remembered as the world's worst living, breathing nightmare. Further onwards, bearing the irrevocable calamitous event wrought by DNA replication, after elusively fleeing away from its death-posing glare on numerous impromptu setbacks, something far more terrifying lurks upon the freezing outskirts of ARC. In specific spots among where you begin to move, an unknown dark silhouette can be seen flying in the background. An upheaval so immense and instant that even its very presence causes the whole area to tremble. A sense of dread beginning to invade the mind, realizing in further notice that this cryptic sequence literally foreshadows true identity's manifestation. In the midst of the hell-sent investigation during a briefing with HQ, critical advisories are sent like a bullet striking against the glass, as an affinity of utter disaster erupts from its center, turmoil insidiously rising into danger after ARC received a devastatingly powerful explosion. A state of an unwelcoming alarm of code red envelops the atmosphere as you once again head out to ARC, or rather, what's left of it. Before then, its physical status remained clear in its natural state, but the structural integrity of Sector 5 is now dismantled and violently torn apart, and an incredulous amount of collateral damage witnessed, that it no longer even is Sector 5 any longer. The gateway leading to the entrance is obstructed with piles of debris. The barrier in the background is cracked. Blast doors entered in previously have been obliterated, and as for the sector itself, submerged underwater. Rooms once frozen, now deemed unrecognizable, and the whereabouts of the giant mysterious figure inhabiting the outskirts, nowhere to be seen, but still present, hiding, lurking inside through the complex maze not located anywhere on the map, until you find yourself reaching for an increase of maximum vitality through a tunnel. A simple acquisition that suddenly crumbled as the floor breaks from underneath, causing you to fall straight through the ceiling and land trapped inside a mysterious room with gigantic severed cables in the background. A room for the connotation of its very name to slowly emerge from the shadows. At this moment, military application purposes built into the Nightmare systems from the Galactic Federation were ravaged, now that it too, along with everything else in the station, have fallen to the X-Parasites, and are now a part of its replicated army, scheduled for termination. Now the fight withheld against the roaming shadow officially commences. Its structure entirely comprised of metallic surfaces invulnerable to all forms of weaponry, except for the device underneath, which is being guarded by its long, segmented arms, firing out multiple shots of energy each time it descends. If such a weak spot is exposed to a full-scale blast of plasma or cold explosive energy, the Nightmare will suddenly reveal its ultimate ability to manipulate gravity, therefore causing the background to turn more distorted and out of shape, while the intense levels of gravity is helplessly weighing down your mobility at a significant rate, leaving you completely vulnerable, even though that its weak spot is still open to attack. Each time the gravitational device takes damage, however, only makes the situation worse. What true identity resides from within the mask of the Nightmare begins to leak the answer in the form of green ooze gushing out from the eyes endlessly, which is then compounded in more extreme gesticulations after removing the weak spot, causes a chain reaction, and begins to present a horrific scene for everyone to witness. A hideous, grotesque, six-eyed abomination suddenly bursts out of the mask and exposes the face of a true living nightmare. One that becomes a reality as it begins to slowly move toward the spot you're holding on to. An ordeal mentally made unavoidable as its very deteriorated presence is forcibly molded into your vision, scarred for life. To make matters even worse, every missile shot causes its face to slowly melt off, yet still fully operational of commencing your demise, sent from where fear was born. In addition to the mechanical whirring noises from the device controlling the forces of gravity, emphasizes the same low synth noise heard in the music, going in tandem with the qualities of distortion, while the simple melody is there to represent the very creature upon your vision, slowly approaching you while being held captive by its appearance. The unnerving two notes heard from the piano playing gently in separate tunes, acting like a timer reaching down to finish what's begun. And finally, the bass completely acting like a heartbeat losing its rhythm, all symbolizing greatly that death is approaching. Unlike the SAX or whatever foul creature lies in the BSL research station made by the X-Parasites, the Nightmare is a manifestation that has quite literally broken the ice, and that the situation before and during the fight gradually grows worse at every turn. And the Nightmare is the very pinnacle of fear itself in Metroid Fusion.
It's either spine-chilling screeches of Bloody Mary or a living, rotting corpse. Pick your poison.
The result will be the same.
Equating to the same qualitative formalities I've stated before with the topic of Ridley being a perfect video game villain, the inclusion of his entire armada of the space pyrite race alone is also a redeemable icon for who they are and what they seek to attain for their notorious ambitions. More notably classified as ruffians always appearing in the midst of a certain missionary objective residing for them to intervene and engage with Samus while she's occupied adventuring or navigating through the vast regions toward the next destination she's aiming for. And when they do decide to pull off an ambush on Samus, well, let's just say that the battle's already ended for them. What interests me the most about the space pirates is the fact that they know damn well how formidable she is in multi-combat. Yet despite this, they're still incredibly persistent enough to hold their vow of destroying their sworn enemy, constantly impeding their goal, regardless if every attempt results in suicide. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean they're deliberately foolish enough to throw their own lives straight at where they're about to instantly meet their fate. On a scientific point of things, they are very intelligent with their prowess of experimental biologic research and analysis on data, enough to where they begin to study how things work and improve their versatility at a significant rate after thoroughly conducting a large portion of research to be utilized efficiently. And the most prime examples that makes all of this intriguingly promising for what they've successfully attained in their dense collection of data saved for future obligations is renovating a metamorphic alteration of their leader to greatly enhance his defenses and technological abilities to a high degree of warning. That suffered a major excruciating flaw in design is the expense for calling it finished. Constructing layers of armor modeled after Samus's beam weapons with consistent durability, yet weak to the same element they're wearing for some reason. And there was at one point where they even attempted to replicate her morph ball ability for their golden opportunity of gaining the upper hand, believing they could potentially recreate everything they've witnessed through Samus's arsenal for themselves. But with rather mortifying results. Even with these obtusely major constraints the space pirates have built into their projects, their incredible sense of wisdom really shouldn't be taken for granted in terms of drastically increasing their threat level considerably. With or without flaws, they're still an elusive and cunningly evil race that knows how to utilize their analysis properly and ultimately reveal themselves as a major threat to the galaxy. Even though that all of their schemes always ends in miserable failure because they just can't compete with Chozo design weaponry no matter how hard they try. That was a time when fortune rained down from an enigma and discovered the element of Phazon, doubling down their research and experiments so tremendously that it gave way to a plan of high risk and high reward by honing it to the fullest extent of using this newly acquired unknown hazardous element to create abnormal versions of standard enemies and other subjects to make bioweapons, therefore increasing their formidability even further beyond normal. Upon reaching an insidious yet significant success rate with their contorted Phazon experiments, they've decided to look more farther beneath the surface of the sediments and come up with more bolder ideas. I have no regrets. Enter down into the ice dome of quarantine, and Thardis, pirate log entries formerly classified as Project Titan, shall reawaken. Another experiment from the space pirates as a result of them testing the properties of Phazon, this time infused into non-organic matter after receiving success from that of the inhabitants obtained from Talon 4. However, the effects from this idea turned out to be so catastrophic that the powers of Phazon infused into Thardis were deemed too powerful, and therefore became an ideal solution of having to completely dispose the project entirely due to an inability of controlling it. A project gone right yet with an unfavorable outcome as the end result. And this colossal sentient mass of solid material found in the dirt is quite formidably effective in combat, able to continuously generate ultra-frigid beams of ice that can render you frozen, hurl 3 rocks of Phazon summoned from the ground, and can curl itself into a ball in an attempt to crush you. Conceptuality-wise, on the other hand, is what makes Thardus truly stand out as a worthy opponent with great replay value. Scans detect massive quantitative levels of Phazon radiation emanating from its physical structure, which is enough to cause the lock-on feature entirely ineffective, therefore requiring the ability of thermal vision obtained back from the depth of the space pirate base in Phendrana Drifts. When the thermal visor is activated, weak points of highly concentrated levels of Phazon will be rendered visible on Thardus' left leg joint, enabling lock-on and now susceptible to attack. Once the weak spot sustains enough damage, the Phazon core will then be exposed, causing immense levels of radiation to overload the thermal visor, forcing to switch back to combat and continue the process as before until it breaks to move on to the next. After the third weak point on its right arm is removed, provocation is enabled as Thardus begins to accumulate solar-powered energy and encases the arena in a veil of light, affecting the combat visor. After when its right arm and both shoulder joints are dismantled, Thardus reverts the scenery back to normal upon realizing that it serves no valid purpose as a strategy whatsoever, thus leaving behind the very last weak point to be ruptured: the head. After that's done, Thardus will crumble and reinstate back to an ordinary, non-sentient, heaping pile of rocks. Albeit this fight can get a tad bit repetitive for having to constantly switch between visors throughout each sequence of Phazon telling thermal vision to get lost every time! But there's just something about the concept of slowly breaking apart an enormous rock beast to oblivion so damn satisfying. And of course, I can't forget about mentioning the music either. Vibes of mystery gifted from the delicate piano melody, while the intense keyboard, epic bass rhythms, the horn in the background, and the rest of the standard noises heard in Metroid Prime's sound font combined together manifest the ideal representation of rectifying the idea for going head-to-head with the Space Pirates' recent Phazon experiments. At first it comes out as a shocking twist for the stone behemoth emerging from the surface. Then the piano adds more elements of mystery to invoke the final conclusion that something unnatural is at work. The power of Phazon mutation. Sentient geological cataclysm. From cool design to genius concepts and awesome music makes Thardus a solid boss fight indeed. Sorry to bring the bad news, Igneous, but I have no one here to kick me out. I have a confession to make. Looking back in the past when the ballot of Super Smash Bros. 4 was announced, I was one of the many naysayers that didn't like the idea of Ridley being playable. As banal as it is to perceive on why, can be briefly summarized as the important factor of him not being able to fit. The same exact idea can be said about Dark Samus, because the purpose of adding yet another Samus in Metroid's lineup of characters to play as in Super Smash Bros. Is asinine, and would be an extremely awkward sight to witness. How naive I was back then. Now that Mr. I'm going to blow your fucking mind has proven my ass wrong about the odds of Ridley and Dark Samus not being possible as playable characters in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, I'm beginning to imagine that people on Amino are probably calling me out by this point, after the given statements I wrote down on my blog. Well, now it's safe to say that I am no longer a naysayer, and instead a proud Ridley main in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Menacing, fierce, merciless, evil, and so goddamn fun to use! I remember the time way back when me and my friends were blown off the edge of our seats when we first saw his reveal trailer like it was yesterday. And after seeing that humorous splash screen of Ridley hits the big time, it made me think to myself, it's not like I've already seen something like that happen before. Alright, hold the fuck up! I have several questions. You are telling me that this tenacious, destructive, life-ruining, cataclysmic Pterosaur hits the big time more than Smash Brothers by coming out of fucking nowhere and arrives to deliver the shocking grand entrance, appearing as the final boss for the first time in Metroid history? Is this not something classified as canon in Metroid's timeline? Does this change anything in Metroid 2 Return of Samus? Why is he built with early meta cybernetics? What is he doing here? And who in the fuck saw this coming? Unless the answers might associate with this theme song playing during the announcement trailer of the game, I believe that it is safe to say that there were a lot of people who had every damn right to not expect this incredulous affinity of making an entrance simply because of the fact that Ridley was never in the original game, nor did AM2R. Or perhaps I'm just droning on over my refusal of disbelieving the unexpected. Regardless though, this entire moment subjectively speaks a lot more than what everyone normally thinks. Because originally, it's the Queen Metroid that's been the final boss in both entries of Metroid 2 Return of Samus. Binary concept of going all out on explosive artillery delivered straight to her face until it blows up. The first one being relatively straightforward that gets more dangerous for each missile you fire at her, while AM2R is the same idea, but made more threatening by going through a series of wall breaking that progressively gets more difficult in each sequence. But in Samus Returns, the Queen Metroid is made completely different than what she was before. She has you constantly push all the way back against a wall, demolishes nearly every trace of area to evade by slamming her head against the ground that covers more than half the room, setting the terrain on fire, and even fire out green orbs of bullet hell while the terrain is rendered off limits, all of which can deal a ludicrous total of a single energy tank for each hit received, making this fight even crazier, intense, and more deadly than ever. In my experiences, it was gladly more than enough to make me believe that this was indeed the final boss due to how many times I've died. Eventually, when I did terminate the Queen Metroid, things started to progress like normal by the standard implemented canonical and important event held accountable in Metroid's story campaign via a perplexing spectacle hatching from the shell born to soon write history in gaming. A helping hand opening the obstructed path leading to reach toward the end for a job well done. Until turmoil suddenly emerges from the amidst of the atmosphere, which is made in the form entirely of dark ambient rehash of criteria from Super Metroid, therefore invoking a forced whiplash vibe of "it's not over yet." Elements that had been slashed mercilessly through the stars even further as I now suddenly see myself outside upon being greeted by an extremely apprehensive setting in the form of a hell-bent raging storm in an ominous green-colored horizon. It almost felt like it was inviting me to something that I didn't want to be a part of, now that I finally understand that the Queen Metroid was only intended for delivering what is yet to come and arrive in utter dismay. Like I said before, who expected Ridley to appear in SR388? Because I sure as hell didn't! I guess if they wanted to make a game meant for reviving a dead series, might as well rectify the meaning of the title for Samus not being the only one to make a return. And by that I mean reiterating the obvious clarification yet again by emphasizing making an entrance. And what's the most definitive solution for Ridley to possibly achieve this than by lurking somewhere near the landing site, lying in wait, and strikes out just when the infant Metroid descends towards Samus' ship and gets captured by him, knowing damn well what it's good for, and optimizes the ideal prevention of Samus from ever attaining her future obligation of discovering what true power lies within that larval parasite. It's rendered unnoticed through the visor, but it is clearly seen from her ferocious actions that Samus is not happy with Ridley's detaining presence in the slightest extent. For a lack of better words to say about it, she is fucking pissed seeing him. She doesn't give a single fuck of what's being made through this sudden calamitous event born from a strike of lightning, because Proteus Ridley is anything but an ordinary encounter. Far from it. Despite his obscurely different and linear facial structure, the primary purple color scheme, cybernetic armor plating, devastating combat potential, theme song, and foreshadowing gesticulations is everything that needs to be brought to mind that it is still indeed Ridley. And by the goddamn deceits of World Dead and Below, this entire fight outclassifies the term epic way beyond anything that has ever happened in all of Metroid history. There is an unreal level of chaos forged into this final draw of Total Insurgents. This incredulous fight against Ridley arrives in the shape of a gigantic blade, sharpened at maximum capacity with contortion, slaughters the classification of ordinary to an irrevocable pile of a dismembered, blood-gushing corpse, flesh with sin and remorse, renovates it back to life, violently re-alters its classification written entirely out of the blood of its ego, and has without fucking question transmuted the ordinary encounter into a quintessential manifestation about a historic event of the main character and her sworn nemesis, justifying the odds, following no rule of authority, both sides doubling down their sworn desire of savage rebellion by unleashing all of their combined strength, going all out, transcending the new meaning of ordinary into a final battle between the main series protagonist and villain, fighting to the death in a literal gathering storm of mayhem. You see this? This is high-profile rejuvenation witnessed in its former glory. This is how you make a proper Metroid game that doesn't kill the franchise. This is what we've been asking for. And this is Ridley's biggest moment ever! Should I stop right there, or should I get to explaining the fight already? As is par for the course by now, the whole concept of Proteus Ridley is everything anyone could ever ask for in a Metroid game. But I have yet to unravel the perceivable factor on what truly makes it stand out as an objectively ideal representation of these qualities gifted from above, and therefore hold total dominion over what the rest of his previous forms didn't come nearly close to provide them completely. Starting off as an okay, you know the rest. With Ridley giving the infant Metroid an early kidnapping, making Samus intervene immediately upon witnessing her nemesis as an unexpected visitor, commencing the fight. Since Proteus Ridley now has the infant Metroid withheld in his grasp, this fight is built completely with him maintaining an airborne style of attacks, bearing a fair minimum consisting of multiple potent bursts of purple energy fired in an arc, standard tail thrusts, and slamming directly down to where you're standing. After Ridley receives a good decent amount of damage, he will then attempt to fly away with the infant Metroid and retrieve it to the space pirates and utilize as powerful sources of energy, causing Samus to run after him and grabs onto his tail to stall his escape. Ridley attempts to shake her off of his tail, allowing Samus for an astute counterstrike for his notion of insignificance by performing a sudden turbo boost, lands onto him and begins blasting rapid shots of plasma energy forcefully onto his chest, causing Ridley to loosen his grip on his hand from the immense trauma he's received, releasing the infant Metroid. Samus then quickly dives down to retrieve it and lands a direct shot of plasma onto Ridley's wing, sending him crashing against the cliffside and falls down to be buried in piles of rubble. Defeated. Hell no! May I need to remind you and further emphasis that he is the final boss for good reason? It should already be known to everyone by this point that Ridley doesn't go down that easily. Especially that this battle of endless outrage lasts for 3 whole phases. If this was Nintendo's true intention for delivering a worthy fight of Ridley to remember, then by the ascended accolade of Satoru Iwata's spirit, they have rectified it endearingly. Because if it's a more than an epic fight to the death you want, then you'd bet your very fucking soul to Satan himself that you're going to get it. Proteus Ridley Phase 2. The infant Metroid now watches the historical event being made as Ridley is more enraged than ever after experiencing a sudden impact of forced delivery bestowed from Samus's vindictive mortal fire wrought with opposing whiplash. In this phase, the option of mercy has been struck down into a state of rebellious calamity as Proteus Ridley now resides on the ground, striking relentlessly with his claws before firing an instant burst of energy. His tail thrusting attack now gains the ability to summon a wave of stone out of the ground, and briefly flies in place, taking up a large portion of the given area from his tail and instantly rams into the wall in an attempt to trap you into the attack. Wielding the same attacks as before previously, in addition to a more commonly used aerial slash if you approach him close enough. In comparison to the first phase, which is only brought out as a warm-up, the second phase, on the other hand, can be best represented as the birthing overgrowth of insanity, encasing around the nightmarishly ominous stationary twister placed in the background, sending out an overly destructive action that legitimately blew my mind and made one with the swirling debris adding to the chaos. Dealt with more damage received, Proteus Ridley gets angered with Samus's ambitious authority and charges after her while Samus defies all laws of physics and jets backwards, trying to fend off against Ridley's desperate impulse, rendered fruitless, as he manages to successfully reach in to grab and throw Samus at the wall, proceeding to immediately strike back a second time, while having her pinned on the ground by his grasp to finish the job on the spot, unable to escape what's about to take its toll. Until...
Samus? Baby Metroid, what are you gonna do now? What? No!
In front of the Chozo, Olympic, Luminoth, and Brionian race ascended from planet Elysia, this goddamn breathing video game history book acquires the gift of delivering the unexpected out of thin fucking air by latching straight onto Proteus Ridley's head and learns the first steps of being a Metroid by draining his life energy as its first victim to assist Samus's survival. Fruition made in clear justification that this living spectacle views Samus as a motherly figure ever since birth. I swear on my life when I begin to say that this contorted fight against Ridley gets even better. Phase 3. Rebellion merged into the ethereal conflict's creation. The maxed out levels of chaos has officially reached a breaking point and has evolved into a complete massacre of merciless cause. The raging storm presented by Incarnation has gathered an insurmountable number of wrath, expelling from Proteus Ridley's ever-growing battle music, exponentially rising straight into madness. The gavel of irrevocable judgment has hit the base, announcing that this fight to the death has reached the final destination. Proteus Ridley, furious as ever, now unleashes his very last deadly attacks onto Samus, as he begins to hover above her and rain down 3 consecutive barrages of explosive energy, generating a shockwave upon impact. Accumulates powerful metal-piercing energy from his claw before lashing out in full force, and finally bearing a brand new attack that equates to the same one as before, but with a much different outcome. Left unavoided, Proteus Ridley will suddenly grab onto Samus and proceed to violently smash her repeatedly against the wall before tossing her away, leaving behind ludicrous amounts of health depleted on her life bar that's dangerously close to reaching 0. However, throughout the rest of the duel's entirety, the infant Metroid now begins to assist in battle after Ridley takes a beating of his own, leaving behind an opening that now enables the use of the melee counter that only reveals itself immediately after it finishes the feeding process for an astute full combat action. Hard to see coming, but once landed in quick, perfect succession, Samus goes straight for the kill and climbs onto Ridley's stunned body, swings around his neck and fires vengeful blasts filled with whatever she's got straight down into his mouth. Conclusion. Phase 1. Warm-up, unexpected intervention. Phase 2. Rage and rebellion begins to manifest. Phase 3. Final destination of main character and villain relentlessly demanding the delivery of their own gifted ordeals in total, dominant massacre. That is the final battle in Metroid Samus Returns, a definitive remake of the second game that has literally transcended revival beyond recognition. In all retrospect, I'm honestly beginning to think that after experiencing this blessed, literal, godlike, substantial performance, I genuinely do not believe that Ridley will ever be replaced as my current favorite video game villain. Because he's just so goddamn perfect of being one. I guess that also says the same for everything else about this series. Endless ethereal experiences waiting to be seen and brought into the light. I'll gladly leave it at that. There are countless occurrences where the inner mindset can often deviate from what's not associated in the present. Likewise, the main aspect of reality tends to get overthrown with a dreadful feeling of anxiety taking over our very well-being, which causes the unwanted gestation period of fear to thrive inside our minds and have complete dominion for what it forces us to receive, and ultimately demoralizes our ambitious moralities as impossible merits to acquire in life. An inauguration of birth that everyone wants to schedule the appointment for an abortion because it's nothing related to the gift of life in the slightest degree that's represented. We as human beings tend to get struck by this moral mentality state and fear the inevitable to destroy us when we least expect it. And since the odds of positive morals are constantly being stacked against us, the brain can be our greatest enemy. It's those kinds of thoughts that it begins to process through our own imagination, and fear abolishes every trace of positivity withheld in it that it makes us believe the worst is yet to come, which in reality never arrives to begin with at all. But regardless of how much abundance of strict apprehensive tension impeding our path we walk upon to only be placed as nothing but a meaningless distraction, it's still that insidiously subtle growth of an attack that can be felt in our bodies. One that can and will have an incredibly significant setback to what our eyes are currently witnessing and enable a different perspective that can only be manifested through the lens of anxiousness. A singular visual aspect gifted from the evil side of our mind that only writes out the ways of life to be put to a screeching halt and shouldn't even matter anymore now that fear has been invited to greatly intensify that energy and completely incarcerate ourselves from ever taking another step back to the present tense. It's always there to come back and haunt us whenever it feels the need to do so, making things relatively difficult because we're being held back against its power that's not at all easy to conquer or defeat. The Metroid series as a whole takes this idea and implements it inside the very atmosphere to carry out everything of what it's always been best known for: the feeling of being watched. There have been countless instances of mental scenarios taking effect in certain areas that's more revolved around isolation. There is no way of telling what is going to happen until you eventually find out for yourself. It's a special kind of fear that focuses on the idea that something may be lurking on the other side, expecting you to arrive and get the best off of you in an instant. But in reality, there's nothing. It's only there for the purpose of keeping you on high alert and on edge the entire time, like you're more than ready to open fire on whatever is causing it. That characteristic goes along exceptionally well for deriving the key concept about the Metroid formula, because atmosphere is the primary ingredient to further classify its main background. But there's also the inclusion of mystery added into the mix to keep things more beneficially interesting. Mother Brain is the perfect example of mystery that can ever be brought out in Metroid's entirety. Logically speaking, the outset contributing her origins before she became the former leader of the Space Pirates is what keeps things intact for that different specified form of mystery. In the beginning, Mother Brain was once created by the Chozo for peaceful purposes, which lasted for a time until her secretive, calamitous plot of bringing true order to the universe by resetting everything back to zero, and her betrayal of the Chozo was eventually revealed when the Space Pirates invaded planet Zebes. Mother Brain saw great potential in them, in high hopes for allowing her goal to be brought to fruition, and so acquired the deceitful desire of controlling the race, therefore becoming their leader, whereas Ridley was put in charge as Space Pirate Commander, and the latter was simply being manipulated by Mother Brain, basically as her servants. And the mystery that's perceivably justified over her intellectual and downright malevolent demeanor correlates to the conclusion that Mother Brain already had a mind of her own from the very start she was created by the Chozo, but has long since eluded the presence of her evil hemisphere by obeying her peaceful authorities until she detected revolutionary potential from the invasion that changed everything into a simple gesture of fingers being crossed for her scheme to take root. Of course, this was never mentioned in the games at all, since her origins are mostly depicted in the manga, yet still follows the general aspect of the actual Metroid timeline. At any rate, Mother Brain is quite the intuitive organic supercomputer that goes right along the spectrum of formidable without question as a Metroid villain that knows how to follow the rules of one. And by formidable, I mean as a singular state of mind that wields all of the necessary functions to control everything from the very area she's stationed in, providing dominion over all that follows her bidding to achieve the indomitable vision she demands as a wish to be granted no matter the cost. With the help of her space pirate comrades and Ridley obeying her commands, along with the Metroid specimens propagated inside the technologically hazardous layer of Turian, built with drastically high defensive security measures, soon to be optimized entirely for bioweapon purposes, should all be taken to note that Mother Brain is most definitely not a run-of-the-mill abnormal human organ with an eyeball. In fact, her basic stationary immobility is tremendously well guarded all the while in every designated room in Turian, that reaching up to her is relatively nothing but a simple accomplishment to acquire in and of itself. In the original NES title of Metroid, the concept of progressing your way to Mother Brain is focused on the general rule of thumb to first eliminate both Kraid and Ridley, the two keys necessary to unlock the gateway and gain clear access to Turian. Upon arrival, hostile Metroid specimens with their respected movement speed will constantly appear in each room to ambush your presence and try to latch onto you,
which pretty much counts as an instant game over if they do. Seriously, it's almost entirely impossible to escape from their grasp. I'm not even exaggerating. Requiring the ice beam to temporarily immobilize them and finish them off with 5 rounds of missiles each. All while Rinkas are constantly spawning in seemingly random locations of the area to deviate your progression considerably until you eventually reach the room where Mother Brain resides. Except this is where things start to become more convoluted and really tedious. The evil manipulating supercomputer is heavily guarded with rows of regenerative zebetite barriers that progressively compounds the situation with each one severed, detaining away from your objective significantly from each hazard, ranging from Rinkas and small cannons firing in random directions oversaturating the complex, while trying to dismantle smaller zebetite barriers on a single platform in a disproportionately small area surrounded by lava. Once all zebetite barriers are removed from Mother Brain's life support systems, fire open a missile to break open the stasis tank around her without falling in the lava below, and she will thus be officially exposed to an unavoidable open-fire missile barrage cycle until she's extracted from existence, commencing the self-destruct escape sequence, therefore fulfilling your mission. Metroid Zero Mission has the exact same idea, but only with a slight couple of adjustments included. Aside from the vastly improved aesthetic design for the gateway, the blast doors leading to the next room in Torian are now being kept shut until all Metroids in the given area are eliminated, all of which can be seen hiding in the background and emerge out once you approach them, instead of appearing in an instant to strike out in short notice like they did before, and aren't as problematic to break free from capture, yet still redeemable as a threat nonetheless. In addition to a lesser evil green Rinka variant instead of the original red ones that makes ammo and health restoration plentiful, as well as the Rinkas by itself now appear in their own spawn points from parts of the terrain. All in all, this version of Torian has been reduced in threat level quite considerably since the NES, save for one and arguably the most infuriating difference according to the fight with Mother Brain. Same concept as before, but much more challenging, now that she gains the ability to attack you with an accumulated blast of purple energy from her eye, as well as keeping her weak spot consistently and frustratingly secure, since getting pushed off the platform each time when the blast hits you will cause Mother Brain's eye to immediately close and remain shut until you jump back and take the effort of avoiding everything to allow the opportunity of dealing damage to her. Even the escape sequence right after her destruction is more tough. Annoying to a certain degree, but deliberately made so, since Zero Mission as a remake to the original Metroid was deemed very recognizable as one from the prestigious improvements they've included, especially for the whole idea of making Mother Brain more intelligent as a challenging obstacle to destroy that doesn't outright kill you from an unfairly easy mistake to make that makes you fall straight into failure. But those improvements gathered to surpass the 8-bit predecessor is only just a drop from the ocean. Not even the slightest level of justice can ever comprehend to what Super Metroid has to object with unrivaled specifications. This widely popular fan-favorite game wields a tremendously powerful arsenal that undoubtedly sustains the very beginning of the franchise, along with it bearing major key differences cropped together for a completely non-binary concept for what source of fear lurks on the other side of that very blast door, waiting to be discovered as something feral. More notably before that, however, is the outset regarding what will soon become history via the plot of Super Metroid. As the timeline follows at its normal chronological order after Metroid 2 reaches the end, Samus takes in the infant Metroid and delivers it to a group of scientists at the Ceres space colony, curious to find out what kinds of powers it possesses. The information they gathered resulted as the key to civilization's revolutionary era for the good of all. Or so we're told, that is. A sense of remarkable achievements gifted by the ever-so-classic line that unfolds its legacy the moment the game begins.
The last Metroid is in captivity. The galaxy is at peace.
For a time, anyway.
A catastrophe. Out comes the severed line of newly acquired merits as Samus receives a distress signal from Ceres Station's triggered critical alert breakout systems almost immediately after she left. When she arrives back, however, that said catastrophe marks the beginning of something more dreadful than what's already being witnessed. The scientists' bodies lie lifelessly on the ground, caused by none other than Ridley, sent to retrieve what he once failed to attain in the past, and succeeds by stealing the infant Metroid and taking it back to planet Zebes for a much bigger prize lying in wait for the space pirates' future bioweaponized army, thus commencing the eventfully important and serious mission to search what's been lost and to take it back to fulfill the dream for mankind's futuristic, transcending civilization. The surface of the planet itself is built with top peak rising levels of uncertain awareness emanating through every desolate area that Samus enters inside, like her very presence is not welcomed in the slightest now that the space pirates are more than aware of her arrival. After certain upgrade statistics are met on criteria, on the right side beneath the green space pirate infested corridor ladder segment is a key relevant red blast door that holds the final conclusion to the game. An intriguingly advanced hallway leads toward a small cave with golden statues held together in the background. Each statue represents the 4 main bosses of the game, instead of the normal 2 securing access to Torian. The gems of the eyes shatter, followed by the statue turning gray, therefore indicating that the boss has been defeated. Kraid, Phantoon, Dragon, and Ridley, respectively. Once all 4 are brought to an end, the floor underneath will slowly start to crumble and reveal a hidden underwater elevator passage leading to the lair of Torian. Earlier on that time, traversing through the unmarked hellish depths of Norfair, however, it's already taken to note that since Ridley has what's being relentlessly sought for by Samus, the belief of claiming what undoubtedly lies beyond the door, once heavily obstructed by Ridley, only turns out to be nothing but a shattered acquisition now that the broken capsule is all that remains of the infant Metroid's known whereabouts. And the search once again continues on down into the belly of the beast. And now, things are once again being familiarized for the prime conceptual stipulates associated in Torian's natural classic formula. Rinka's spawn, Metroids impede, freeze and shatter while avoiding capture, door unlocks, par for the course. It may appear at an already perceivable glance that nothing in particular has changed at all, since everything remains the same for Torian's normal standards of progression. But in fact, there are some other unique hidden factors just waiting to reveal Torian's tricks kept up its sleeve. More specifically, consisted as ones that are objectively doubled down classifications written as nothing but immensely unexpected turn of events that's straight up mind-blowing. After all Metroid specimens have been extinguished, you will then enter inside an entirely new area that's not of Torian design. Instead, it's what appears to be a desert-themed environment holding different, stronger species of enemies not normally found on the planet. Mystery invokes the vicinity in far greater levels than usual, now that this remotely out-of-place area is officially part of the Torian complex. But that mystery instantly regresses straight down into a heaping mass of turmoil. When moving onwards inside the ambiguous environment reveals a small isolated room containing a Torizo statue placed in the center wielding a stance of offense, like it's one for Samus to oppose like the others. That is, until it suddenly disintegrates into a pile of dust upon firing. And the turmoil is increasing much more further after realizing in extreme further advisories that danger is within reach. a source of emanating danger that exponentially increases in sheer powerful levels of apprehension after multiple other creatures gathered in the next room that have suffered the exact same fate as the Torizo statue. The needle has hit the red zone. Danger is critically imminent. That's also not to mention the suspenseful boss approaching music encasing the atmosphere in greater levels for clear emphasis on the dreadful situation that's being uncovered, which from that point forward hits a tremendous break point when the screen scrolling interval suddenly comes to a halt, followed by a two-legged enemy creature subspecies slowly jumps out from the left side of the area until that minor unthreatening enemy encounter is demolished in a goddamn instant when a gigantic abnormal-sized Metroid strikes out faster than a simple bodily motion and immediately follows its instincts by latching on to the enemy and has every single living trace of life energy extracted out of its body and joins the fallen as an empty husk. But that outcome of dismay grows more worse as the Metroid now has its sights aiming directly toward you. An irrevocable withdrawal of pursuing actions that can only be watched as Samus's entire stock of energy reserves is now being absorbed in rapid acceleration, weakening her mobility. All attempts for retaliation are fruitlessly wasted. What comes next ends it as nothing but a misconception after Samus's health stops with 1 HP remaining. At this very moment, right before when the inevitable was about to take its toll, after every option for escape became disabled, the final result comes in as multiple elements built together for this grand scene of a remarkable discovery manifested in both perspectives for Samus, barely hanging on, and the Metroid, realizing its mistake for almost killing her, and runs off apologetically in a regrettable fashion, justifying the whole scenario as one that presumably led to an instant unavoidable demise, but is instead forced to disobey the cataclysmic withdrawal and restores function between the bond that was bestowed from the beginning of an unbreakable connection. An inspirationally and objectively historical moment of the ages carries out in fascinating conclusion that this very abnormal gigantic Metroid that is being witnessed above Samus's head, seen as a near lifeless victim, is the exact same one she has been searching high and low for. And furthermore, in an amazing twist to always remember as the days go by, the Metroid, no longer an infant, still remembers her as its mother. It is nothing short but a miracle that something like this has been turned for the better, and I can guarantee that a lot of players back in the day were brought with a state of utter amazement when the moment of realization struck down, inches close, before death was about to execute the final moments of Samus's life. But this miraculous discovery of Super Metroid is only the goddamn beginning for what I stated objectively before on the last entry in regards to making history in video games. After when the grown-up Metroid runs off in lament, you descend down further onwards toward where the organic, manipulative, and traitorous supercomputer lies secluded beyond the glass structure of her stasis tank, patiently awaiting your grand arrival like the good old days. Although things start off relatively normal and basic standards for Turian's formula, save for the chamber requiring a couple extra missiles to shatter off an exposure for Mother Brain's second downfall. Once that's done, the mechanical structures securing Mother Brain in place will crumble off from her life support systems and be left to suffocate from lack of energy sustenance. At least, that's what everyone, and myself included, initially thought would happen at first. Because never in our entire lives would we ever possibly begin to imagine that instead, all hell would break loose. I don't think even an exorcist would be enough to dispel what sort of hell-bent, contorted, grotesque abomination has emerged from its unwanted revival. Especially coming from one that has recently undergone increased bioweaponizing procedures for the purpose of relearning their previous mistake to never be made the same way as before, and clearly seen that it was further done so by allowing newly acquired limb enhancements to hedge its bet at maximum levels and desperate notions. In other words, Mother Brain is no longer messing around. Her desire for wanting total dominion over the universe has escalated so drastically since her first cause of termination that her commitment is still held true by the presence of her transcended revitalization as one to further demonstrate that she means business. And throughout the entire time during this horrifyingly unexpected encounter between a nightmare-inducing form of Mother Brain that's now a straight-up demon, the whole idea of fear waiting to strike down whenever you least expect it to happen, combined with the aspects of unwariness and mystery, building up the setting for deriving those powerful elements of fear, expressing what sort of disaster is lurking in the shadows to get the best off of you in an instant. A belief that's pierced into your mind by brute mental force has now become a reality from which there is no way out from its grasp. You are trapped from within the hands of evil, causing immense anxiety to be produced exponentially, forcing you to expect that this will officially mark the end of your life. But instead of anything like this happening outside the world of screen technology, it is actually being manifested in the game that's being played. And the protagonist that you are playing as is witnessing the very source of all fear being contained inside the very small room where you remain, trapped, nowhere to run, held back from the behemoth that has its eyes locked onto your sights, seeking to destroy you with no means of avoiding its mortal strike. A living nightmare of monstrous size, expelling purple haze from the lungs of true evil thirsting for mutilation, representing the physical manifestation of fear itself, thriving within the music that plays alarmingly, that it sounds like the odds of victory are never in your favor. What's happening is starting to begin. The extreme amounts of apprehension, combined with turbulent noises heard in crucial factors written in nothing but dread, overflowing the atmosphere, in addition to the spine-chilling screeches of Mother Brain molded together into one big mass of fear, makes this scene so goddamn intense and insidiously heart-pounding. Even more so that it was deliberately designed in 16-bit quality, just for the purpose of causing the player to feel afraid and defenseless. The concept of this fight against Mother Brain's demonic form for fear implementation is jarring enough on its own as a Metroid experience. However, additionally, it is also that kind of special experience in video games that looks and feels immersive. And I could even go as far by reiterating my objective statement, increasingly more factual, that it is, without question, a beyond ethereal work of mastery that no other video game can ever possibly have the chance of surpassing what is about to be justified. Mother Brain's soul-driven commitment of attaining her goal has maintained a direct superior life form in unreal qualities that her arsenal consists of an onslaught of attacks to prepare for the worst. Multiple blue rings that expands in diameter and follows your movement, a small bouncing bomb that creates a widespread shockwave once it goes off, linear space pirate projectile firing directly above, and an auto-seeking barrage of segmented explosions that launches out at ridiculous speeds. Since it's an obvious clarification to perceive over Mother Brain recently hedging her bet to ensure the desire for the probability of failure to be 100% unlikely on her part, her entire body is left completely invulnerable to all forms of attacks she receives. Even if you focus on the standard efforts of aiming for her head, it does absolutely nothing to reveal a sign of making progress. In fact, every charge shot, missile, and super missile are now resistant and effectively useless. Yet despite her now rapid-fire missile barrage invulnerability state making it seem pointless to oppose her, it still remains as the only option you have that's meant for offensive maneuver stipulates in an attempt for a so-called do something gesture. But those notions for desperate retaliation only merges into a much different scenario to what's classified as one that no one in their entire life could ever bear the will of expecting to happen right before them. After certain conditions are met through multiplied useless missile inputs fired repeatedly at the head, Mother Brain's actions for fighting gradually diminishes into a halt in a confusing turn that makes it believe that progress is being made for the player. However, little did they expect that feeling of progression was not specifically intended to be for them. Instead, the whole idea of Mother Brain slowing down was made for her to draw in unreal amounts of energy stored inside her head, and uses all of it at once in the blink of an eye to unleash the most infamous upon infamous, monumentally devastating, unavoidable laser of death. The jaw-dropping effects from this attack are so unbelievably powerful that it is more than enough to not only literally vaporize your ammunition reserve straight down to zero and deal an insane amount of damage to make Phil Swift gush over in complete satisfaction, but it is also that compoundingly strong in such immensely sharpened measures to permeate the mind in disbelief as Samus Aran, once known as a fearless, powerful bounty hunter in the galaxy, is now seen in a permanent sprite animation, writhing in pain and brought down to her knees after receiving the blast from Mother Brain's hyper beam. But in addition, more beyond that, this attack from Mother Brain is also that tremendously powerful enough to ultimately create the very fucking pinnacle for the whole idea of making the player feel useless, weak, pathetic, demoralized as they reach in for the controller and notice the unthinkable outcome received from the hyper beam when the act of controlling their character has now become disabled. In other words, you are no longer in control. It has come to this moment of you being forced to witness the nightmarish evolved bioform of Mother Brain proceeding to unleash more of the attack onto their character, or in this case, themselves, seen completely defenseless, vulnerable, hopeless, standing no chance against the unbelievable situation seen with their very own eyes, having no other options left but to submit. believing that this is, indeed, the end. Mother Brain's continuous outburst from her secret weapon rages on, an atomic, immersifying trauma sent to Samus Aran, as her health has reached the critical danger zone, approaching closer and mocks her up front by slowly diminishing her remaining energy down to half of an energy tank left over. Still unable to stand from the insufferable affliction she's received in repeated agonizing nuclear warfare that's ever so close to intrude inside her body and demolish her ambition to nothing, readying the final excruciating blast of energy to mercilessly destroy her on the spot. Just when all hope is about to be lost, out of fucking nowhere, the now grown-up Metroid, still holding its powerful will as Samus's child, arrives in a goddamn instant once more, just in time before the last draw from the attack was about to connect, and violently latches onto Mother Brain's head, absorbing the attack and extracts her life essence into a colorless husk, and floats towards Samus to deploy its victim's life energy to replenish hers, witnessing in disbelief that this very creature grew up to become a miracle like no other video game could ever manage to compete with so much powerful and conflictingly unfathomable effects. Perceiving the act for this Metroid, earning every right to begin pasting its own legacy on a slab made of diamond as a living miracle for the player. The beginning of history being purposely written in all of gaming, as its process for healing Samus still remains in effect. Mother Brain suddenly resurrects back from the dead, rejuvenated with full energy, uncontrolled by her furious actions, aiming at the Metroid, defending Samus like a shield, taking in every blow, reducing in color, and finally loosens its grip to go in for a second attack in an effort to protect its mother no matter the cost, even if it means its own life. And just like that, history has been made. Since the dawn of the beginning for a new era was brought out for the universe, a living spectacle like no other, a parasitic creature classified as one to be extremely dangerous and assigned for the expense of mass genocide, unthreatening gestures only seen as a welcoming gift for its very first sight. It called its mother, following around Samus like a pet, following the event of civilization's future utilized by its monumental energy-producing qualities, ravaged as the enemy steals the key to the universe's revolution for the good of all, and taken in for the cause of evil as a bioweapon. Sought to search high and low across every dark and imposing landscape across planet Zebes. A commitment so strong and built with unreal amounts of ambition leads up to the moment of finding it again, grown more larger, still able to recognize the character after all this time since it was kidnapped, and arrives back once again, for the last time, by saving Samus Aran's life, dreadfully hanging close by a thread, about to fall in an immediate demise, revitalizes her powers back to normal condition, all while shielding her for protection against Mother Brain's furious, sudden revival, and allegedly rebels against her attacks, slowly turning darker in color, until the final moment reaches into a closure as the most beyond greatest sacrifice ever seen in the history of gaming. A sacrifice so unbelievably mind-blowing that after all this time, with every ounce of sweat and blood, overflowed with ambition, seeking the infant Metroid, led to waste. The key, the answer, the very image needed to unlock the future for the good of all civilization, gone, destroyed, deceased, history falling from above your head. The extinction of Metroids occurs right before you, the last of its kind, once known to carry out a brand new future, now known as a miracle. Letting out a heart-piercing shriek and explodes into pieces. And at that moment, all traces of alarming fear are extinguished and is thus replaced by the outskirts of Crateria, normally heard near Samus's gunship, and is now heard in the form of glory, reawakening into a fanfare of triumph and victory, as the Metroid's demise causes its remains to be absorbed by Samus and acquires the very source of energy it has extracted from Mother Brain, the secret weapon that was devastatingly close to killing you. The Hyper Beam is now fully utilized into your arm cannon and fired back against her. Sweet, sweet revenge officially commences Mother Brain's ultimate termination. The very source of fear, now wearing the expression of impossible, has now lost its power and is set to be conquered and dispelled from existence forever. Triggering the planetary escape sequence just like always, and Super Metroid ends at the cost of everything, with only your life surviving the catastrophe and living on to tell the tale like no other. I am at a loss for words of how incredulous this fight, along with Super Metroid in general, being so perfect with everything that the world has ever known. I can't even begin to express how appalled I am for knowing the whole idea of this entire fearfully conflicting and tremendously immersive scenario was actually made for a fucking video game on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System during the 1980s. How is something like this even possible? How could a game with little to no physical representation of dialogue being noticed in its entirety actually have the goddamn liability of creating such an insurmountable impact that was designed for the final boss? And yet, I'm asking like I don't already know. Super Metroid is just the game to have every right of defining actions speaking louder than words. And oh my fucking Arceus and Shang-Tian almighty, Mother Brain is packed with it! A fight that starts in shock and horror all throughout, immersifying the experience by the game calling you worthless and unable to achieve anything, but only left to accept your fate, results in a miracle sent to save your life from the evil clutches of fear, dangerously close to get the best off of you in an instant, and bestows the weapon needed to eliminate the source for good. Mother Brain is a boss fight in Metroid that continuously spreads throughout and beyond in each passing day to reach into the minds of players to experience in all of its former glory in excellent measures of what it was made to do. It emerges in fear and grows in unrelenting suspense like no other, transmuting into demoralizing failure that was forced to be accepted. But when all seemed lost, the Metroid comes in to save your life by sacrificing its own, and allows you to obliterate the infernal creature and escape with your life. A fight that ends in equality. This Metroid was the key to attainment, the cause for Mother Brain to take over the universe by resetting everything to make things however she desired with the power of the Metroid, and the cause for Samus for allowing civilization to evolve by harnessing the powers of the Metroid for good. Both commitments brought to an end. Neither will see the light of day. but it was done for the cause of something, or rather, someone being much more important than anything else that will change the future. You, the player, as intergalactic bounty hunter, Samus Aran. Absolutely fucking phenomenal. And yet, we've reached the top 3. Over time, throughout my mentally incarcerated detainment period, in my youth years being secluded down in the basement playing games to relieve overwhelming stress off of myself, I've begun to realize how naive I was for growing easily attached to the only games I owned. I can only bring the conclusion to mind that, admittingly, I knew nothing about the general aspect of video games from the start, since I really didn't have any access, or the responsibility for all that matter, to internet privileges. And because of that, even to this day, my passion for the underrated still exists within me. However, if I had to begin with the procedure of extracting one of those games out of the railing system for underrated, would contribute in full specified factors that Metroid Other M is less divisive enough to classify as an underrated game. If anything, this is a definitive example of an absolute train wreck to a majority of people who experience its background. Mainly because it ruined the main aspect and aesthetic of the Metroid formula in substantial effects that it doesn't go on par with the rest of the series in any way that's seen, aside from its place on the timeline. Along with a couple other fancy ideas that was somehow considered as a genius fundamental concept brought on the discussion tables. The most painfully obvious one being how annoyingly repetitive Samus is during the intro while she's thinking without any vocabulary alternatives whatsoever, which is most likely due to bad localization. The point to move on mechanic is haphazardly notorious and overall fucking asinine. The plot is basically polished off of Samus's armor and developed entirely by the Galactic Federation for irrational purposes that couldn't be any more absurd, especially the plot twist at the end. Like, how is this even close to being called a brilliant idea by a functioning human brain? The FPS mechanic is borderline atrocious and literally impossible to optimize in combat. Standing in place while firing your arm cannon? What's the worst that can happen? Everything, now that Samus instantly becomes unreliable and acts like a fucking statue each time with every vertical rotation on the Wii remote. How could you take out the primary standard aspect of the entire FPS universe that made Metroid's gameplay more enjoyable since it was introduced, only to be objectively worse in every goddamn way imaginable, and that you somehow seem to ignore what it's supposed to be? There is no excuse for a moral sin like that. I'd say go back, but it's far too late to change what's already been made. That's also not to mention the excruciatingly tedious and downright obnoxious fact of having the point A to point B objectives replaced entirely with save stations that's actually required to unlock the door by saving the game multiple times. Why would you do this? That's the summary of Other M. Iffy voice acting, missionary objectives are now pointless to achieve and painfully linear, therefore making it far worse than Fusion. The story is terrible, and the first-person view had its life essence sucked into an insufferable paradox. But this is all being spoken from a minority side of things and rational negativity bias that I'm certain everyone else can agree with. I don't mean to sound too subjective about this, but logically speaking, the rest of Metroid Other M is, for the most part, pretty damn impressive. I mean, even though the story of the game is genuinely horrible,
The idea of seeing Samus actually having a personality into her character for once is what gets me the most about Other M for what it is and how it plays out through Samus's vision. All the while as turmoil, suspense, and insidious tension is all that exists in the atmosphere of the game. It's a game meant to keep you on edge, and above all, make you completely aware of your surroundings at all times. The music in particular is quite the exceptionally unique prospect for opening the grand display of action immediately after following the events of the atmosphere. In addition to being entirely comprised in a symphonic orchestra composition is nothing short but surprising. To add on more about what Other M does good with, is the fact that it knows how to define unpredictable with effective results. That goes without saying. The live cinematic action cutscenes made to keep those ideas more interesting and goes along perfectly with the setting depending on the situation that occurs. Specifically, right when a boss fight is about to pursue with hardly any notice that's given in even the slightest degree. And these types of bosses can either be a massive hit or extremely lackluster in battle that fails to deliver proper authentic expectations. To be fair, if there is one thing to enjoy about Other M, it would undoubtedly have to contribute to its gameplay. More specifically, in fact, the instant dodging abilities and the lethal strike mechanic. It's just the whole idea of Samus acting like a total fucking badass by witnessing her swift mobility that's built in incredible proportions to have the capability to avoid all sorts of attacks sent out relentlessly and combining it with the lethal strike mechanic featuring an automatic transition leading straight into a cinematic animation of her mercilessly striking down on an enemy to go in for the kill is what makes it so unbelievably satisfying to watch each time when an opportunity like that is given. In all seriousness, this gameplay mechanic alone is what kept me invested the most all throughout the game. At any rate, this particular contender as a Metroid boss is still awaiting to have its accolade placed endearingly atop its pedestal with pride. And that worthy selection is going toward a much bigger prize about to accept the honor in rectified qualities. Sometime later, after enduring through numerous Force Obedience authorities, don't get me started, your arsenal will finally be fully authorized and able to use power bombs wherever and however necessary for the rest of the game until your heart's content. On an important note, these spherically shaped barrier structures placed around certain areas can now be opened and accessed to obtain its hidden contents and secretly hidden / alternate routes to navigate anywhere on the bottle ship. After avoiding every possible outcome of getting pulverized to oblivion and dying like a bitch by a rage quit inducing insect warrior first, I hate this! One of them which contains the final area in the main sector reaching toward the end of the post-game. After terminating the Dysprochian initiating lockdown in the small hallway, proceed through the door and you will enter inside a gigantic arc-shaped path leading directly to your destination. All the while as packs of mini-bosses and Zabezian enemies spawn mysteriously out of portals to attack you. Though since you're permanently equipped with your strongest latent abilities acquired thus far in the game, they're of little to no threat whatsoever to take care of. So screw you, screw you, screw you, and screw you! A short yet satisfying intervention indeed, now that there's absolutely nothing to stand in your way any longer, now that every such attempt of death has been thrown into the pile of their deceased bioweapon relatives. But I require more sustenance, because my feelings for satisfaction are insignificant. So what if we took in Metroid Other M's dodging mechanic and have it fully implemented and optimized entirely for the fucking concept as the final boss?
By the holy words of a Cole's Testament, don't even fucking bother asking if I am completely satisfied. I couldn't be anything more than that now that this ethereal gameplay mechanic has been maxed out in full potential to deliver the most godlike final boss in Metroid I have ever fought in my entire damn life. And not much additional explanations need to be said on why, other than the fact that you're already looking at it. But what exactly is causing all of this perfection to be manifested onto the now destroyed control bridge? Well, as it turns out, this cryptic, unnatural-sized cephalopod of pure excellence is the same major enemy haunting the wrecked ship in Super Metroid. Except in Other M, Phantoon's placement as a secret true final boss is without any indication of why it is. And by that, it remains completely undetermined and obscure enough to have no logical explanation for what its placement in Other M means. It's just there. But should anyone really care as to why? If anything, I'd condone concepts in and of itself to do the talking. Phantoon, I authorize you to proceed with what you are doing. I feel like I need to file out a couple extra clarifications and explain more rationally for what makes this dodging mechanic by itself, aka Phantoon, stand out a whole lot more than the last entry. I may sound too subjectively biased from this, but regardless, the fact of having the most badass mechanic sharpened at maximum efficiency to use against the final boss feels so goddamn empowering to be invested in. More than literally anything else that the bosses in this game had to offer. And while it does reuse the same battle music from the Queen Metroid, honestly, who gives a shit about that one? The sheer intensity giving off in a scenario like this is a hell of a lot more effective, since the fight literally starts itself in a breakout sequence until the area from where you're fighting drowns in space and tears it wide open to unleash an everlasting onslaught of chaos, spawning in literally every corner around the room. This fight acts like an endless bloom of disaster that reproduces exponentially to the point where it oversaturates the vicinity with Phantoon's attacks. It's an overwhelming storm that's constantly breeding in an endless cycle and never shows any sign of slowing down. As soon as this gargantuan, alienated, outer dimensional cephalopod enigma opens its jaw-like eyelid, the glass window securing the front of the control bridge takes a violent impact until it shatters off completely by force, which increases the diameter of Phantoon's attacks to surround the air, now entirely exposed in space. A whole plethora of turbulent destruction, raging from Phantoon's tentacles striking across the room if approached too close. Classic eerie blue eyeballs covered in a fiery aura that homes in directly toward you in swarms of bullet hell, severed hand Cyclops enemies that will try to capture and slam you onto the ground while distracting your aim at Phantoon's eye. Dark swirling vortexes summon on the surface that burst into a pillar of agony after a certain amount of time passes, all of which can and will occur all at once. But despite literally everything that's happening in this fight, none of it, I repeat, none of it even matters to be considered a major threat to you. At no point, what? At no point are you, I can't. At no point are you ever close to receiving a hit from this endless cycle of mayhem because of how effortless it actually is to avoid everything. It's all being taken complete care of by the dodging mechanic itself. All that it takes to perform a single dodge. God, what the fuck? I love this too much. All that it takes to perform a single dodge is the slightest input of the direction you press. You can lightly tap to wherever you want to go, and Samus will do the rest. Furthermore, no practice is needed at all. You can legitimately input a dodge into another one repeatedly until the attack is finished. But since the attacks sent out from Phantoon are always spawning left and right across the room, the dodging mechanic is made eternal. The main thing that I fucking love the most about this fight is the fact of seeing Phantoon going all out on the assault so overwhelmingly to demand your death, but its relentless retaliation is ultimately proven 100% ineffective. I'm in tears right now, holy shit. Is ultimately proven 100% ineffective, all the while as Samus is inevitably prevailing by making things look so goddamn easy. And I can never get enough of it. It's just so thrilling and unbelievably satisfying for a Metroid boss experience. It's easy, it's stupid, but oh my god, does it work! But hang on a second. I just thought of something. If it is indeed true that Phantoon is not only part of a spectral creature existing from another dimension, but also said to be the physical manifestation of Mother Brain's consciousness, then does that mean its appearance isn't too vague after all? Is the clone of the real Mother Brain that's not an android still alive somewhere even after Sector 0 was destroyed? Is this only part of the fight against what it could have been with the clone of Mother Brain? Is this what it was supposed to be? Ending anticlimactically, but not yet finished? I guess this comes to the obvious conclusion that Mother Brain isn't the only thing that remains mysterious. And I'm afraid that even a remake wouldn't be able to do justice for it. Oh well, as long as it keeps the epic dodging maneuvers, that's all that matters to me. Because this fight took my breath away. Sometimes, there are those moments when life gives us the worst option that could ever be selected. And now it looks like I don't have any other choice but to move on. But in a situation like this, of where hope, faith, and courage are never present, just makes it so insufferable to follow the path of acceptance. It's so hard for me to even begin with this, and why it's ranked this incredibly high, like it was made to be an unoriginal and fucking obvious choice as an overall favorite, like how everyone else views it as something admiring solely because of Rundus and him alone, without any representation of what carries out in the fight. That is only a mere fraction of what this fight truly means. But the rest of those reasons I have to say about it is justified, and more on a spiritual level of countless experiences I have been holding on to for over a decade. Each playthrough I have gone over time and time again, from this moment of having to fight Rundus to the death, has inevitably made the steering wheel pull me into another direction that felt the most painful I have ever taken by force. Because to me, Rundus is not just one of those characters that looks, acts, and sounds awesome. He is also one that I've always come to admire as a privilege for what his role in the game is meant to be received as. His bold and daring demeanor for attaining his personally assigned bounties to take in and admire for self-achievement, combined with his flaunting personality, may look to be something to scoff at for how overconfident he really acts as a character that always manages to steal the spotlight numerous times, especially for his short-lasting glorified tune, emphasizing it like it's made to feel humbly admired to. But the reasons for all of this being like that to begin with can simply be put into words of him arriving to the rescue. Likewise, a hero that deeply admires and gives respect for who you are and knows what you're truly made of. It was such an amazing inspiration to acquire feelings of motivation just by witnessing Rundus' character for everything he does and what he was best known for during the invasion on planet Norian. It's feelings like these that gives out a delicate flow of believing that things surely will turn for the better, thanks to his noble will and high moral standards as a character that respects Samus as a worthy ally, combining efforts to achieve victory, and justice will prevail in the end. To actually think that those words would be his last. After awakening from a comatose state, power invigorates through the veins now that the blast received from Dark Samus made you acquire internal Phazon enhancements, learning the hyper mode ability and utilizing your energy to be amplified at deadly proportions to unleash what's constantly being generated straight at the enemy. Insurmountable ambitions flow through inside, opening up a brand new mission to seek the downfall of Phazon corruption from ever attaining its heartless goal, led by slaves fallen to its malicious nature, and therefore forced to follow by what commands it, until the scheme is brought into fruition, which will soon engrave the same fate for Samus, as she enters hyper mode in the midst of investigating Planet Brio by opening fire at a Phazon vine structure blocking the way forward, and her body suddenly starts to overreact with Phazon multiplying rapidly until it ultimately manages to take over and thus follow evil's corruptive desires, and the journey instantly comes to an end. It's a mission of harsh endurance, now that Phazon corruption looms about in every area you breathe in. The Phazon Enhancement Device, a suit that was once used for an increase of maximum firepower, now officially being worn as your own living death sentence. As a result of current status transmissions unable to be received from Federation HQ, adds up to the unfortunate conclusion that all hired bounty hunters have fallen to Phazon corruption after experiencing the exact same thing that almost happened to you, but couldn't defeat. And once you reach them, they speak to you in an unnatural way that already clarifies their own characteristic figure as one that's been forsaken, ravaging their inner mind and body, now left without a soul to keep, destroyed by the act of corruption. But on the case with Rundus, silence is all that remains through him. First seen in secret as an Easter egg perched on top of a monument decoration, standing near the entrance toward the GFS Theseus, watching over in the distance, and goes away after catching a glimpse of his presence. It's a hidden discovery placed so ambiguously that it feels like that his corrupted mind is following the order of preparing to change course and await your arrival in the fiery air dock. Eventually, once you do, he is seen standing high above an elevated room, staring down at you, while his deep choir tune plays out for his very appearance, but is cut short when he suddenly turns away and leaves without saying a word, made to bring out confusion that can't foretell what he's officially become. And so those feelings of wanting to find out the truth tempted by your highest degree of morals, Likewise, it's made for you to believe that Rundus is still there, and going after him would solve everything. Upon entering inside the Temple of Brio, an armada of space pirates intervenes above the vicinity and dispatches their numbers to attack you. When all of them are destroyed, Samus is seen still engaged with what's left, until a giant structure of ice suddenly spawns in the center and expels multiple trails of ice chasing after the space pirates and opposes them on contact. Spoken in glory from the familiar vocalized tune when Rundus once again comes in to aid for assistance just like before. Relief now that his actions are viewed as normal. But when you decide to take a step closer, Rundus suddenly retaliates against you in an alarm of surprising actions to clearly explain the idea of what's going on, and follows with a message as the worst possible answer to ever think of. This can't be real. It's not possible. Sadly, it is. I myself couldn't feel any more shattered after everything that Rundus has done to save Samus's life twice over, and all the while respects her for who she is, comes down to the most unthinkable and catastrophic conclusion that this is how you repay him. And it's even more painful for me to say that this is a fight that occurs way too early in the game. An obligation to bring the Phazon massacre to an end starts off with killing the character who is the most important of them all. Rundus, a living symbol of justice, a character that has become a hero to the player, but above all, he is an irreplaceable friend that has now vanished as a result of the vile, destructive, mutagenic, and cancerous element, Phazon, by holding its unbearable will to destroy all life, and therefore forcing you to put an end to another one. This is not a fight. It's a fucking dilemma. It's cruel enough to perceivably justify over how much conflicting torture and emotion plays out during this insufferable ordeal. Because theoretically, I can give out plenty of reasons over what this fight truly speaks out to me in compounding factors according to my eyes. Since Rundus is the only character that remains silent throughout his corrupted status, in addition to mysteriously laying siege against the space pirates before the encounter commences, despite being called one of their commanders, the silhouette of Dark Samus transitioning inside Rundus's body, along with PED modification equipment not showing any sign of Phazon flowing through himself, can correlate in complete, full summary that he is, in fact, not corrupted. No, it's much worse than that. Instead, he's being possessed personally by Dark Samus itself, using him as a puppet against Samus, like it knows how important he is to her as a close friend, heartlessly mocking her by abolishing all known traces of hope, and leaves the situation running with only one option left to choose from: putting an end to Rundus's misery. Furthermore, during this heartbreaking dilemma, the only thing that he constantly does is present tragic, meaningful gesticulations that clearly indicates him so desperate enough to avoid fighting altogether, as do you, which is expressed in a detailed manner as he's constantly running away and attacks with multiple bursts of freezing cold air that's sent out as a way of saying, "Stay away from me," or "I don't want to hurt you." And on certain occasions, he'll let out these genuinely painful screeching noises meant to portray that he's suffering. It honestly almost sounds like that those are the noises emitted from the real Rundus,
who is now mentally trapped inside and forcefully being held back by Dark Samus from ever allowing him to fight or subdue against its dreaded dominion. In other words, the mind and soul is Rundus, incarcerated from within and unable to scream, but the body is Dark Samus, controlling his every action and therefore making him suffer while the situation lies helplessly in limbo and drowns in the darkest emotion imaginable, for it to end in unrelenting sorrow. Like this is all in spite for Dark Samus's intention to make fun of the protagonist, just like the heartless creature it was literally born to be. To add on more about this though, during this fight, Rundus is not only capable of generating and manipulating the ice element at will, but he also wields something different that rectifies accordingly with what I've been mentioning about Dark Samus possessing Rundus's body. If at any point when you receive a direct hit from Rundus's close-range ice saber attack, this will happen. My experience hearing this very noise expelling out with such sinister and menacing quality felt so agonizing to me that it tore me apart from how much I strongly believed that this malicious, haunting, and pure evil, corrupted laughter did not sound anything like Rundus at all. It's just not. This is literally the sound of complete, total, insulting mockery from the enemy that's toying around inside, who you're forced to kill. And getting hit by this simple attack alone honestly does a whole lot more than follow the linear-based standard rule of being an attack programmed to damage you. Because for me personally, it hurt so much for the sole reason when I discovered this attack by accident and being completely unaware to hear what comes out immediately after. It's nothing but a straight up insult delivered by Dark Samus in such a feral tone that it creates something more important to add inside the horrible void of endless emotional torture. I may be over-exaggerating with all this, but I still can't get over the amount of affliction this attack personally does to me. It's a heartlessly cruel way of Dark Samus making fun of you, playing with your emotions, and enjoy seeing you suffer from what it's doing, and that there's nothing you can do about it. This fight is filled with so much insufferable conflicted pain and emotion that I cannot believe of how far it was actually taken to make the player feel sad and remorseful. They literally did everything they could to create a character that was specifically intended to receive so much recognition as a highly inspirational sign of motivation to show what you're truly made of, to be admired as a hero, and even giving them the desire of wanting to become like him because of what he does to achieve all of which he's familiarized with. All of this, after experiencing what he was best known for, turns into a living nightmare. A painfully arising conflict about yourself, being forced to kill who you admire as a friend that's done so much for you. And this is the only thing you have to give him in return. There is no other way to allow the odds of morals to be in your favor. It's a dilemma that tightens the shackles around what can't be condoned, but only to make it suffer and endure a cold, harsh reality to be taken by force. Rundus is a fight that goes in depth to quintessentially define every living, natural characteristic of how it feels to endure the act of putting an end to someone who is endlessly suffering, and therefore having no possible solution to cure or heal them for survival, believing that that person is so important to them for what they mean as someone to admire by receiving their unending love or respect, and that they had so much to live for, but never acquired the chance to fulfill. Because in Rundus's case, he is the third boss fight that's encountered in Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. His role started off strong and noble, but when you reach him in Brio, that is the time where it officially comes to an end, along with every chance to develop his character. Wasted. It is a fight that gives new meaning to painfully easy, just by the mere fucking presence of his health bar rapidly depleting. And because of that aspect, it's specifically designed to either make him suffer a slow and painful death, or with hyper mode, a quick and painless one. And it ends all the same, regardless of what exploit is chosen. Sorrow and misery. More importantly, above everything else, however, is the music that plays and follows during this torturous dilemma. Yeah, as if that was something I'd possibly forget to mention. It is a phenomenal arrangement that acts like a tidal wave built with power and epicness, rising at its peak for the glory of Rundus's heroic image, but lasts for only a couple of seconds until that wave of power and epicness regresses into nothing, and thus entirely replaced by a tsunami raging rapidly towards the shore, all the while continuously building with energy until the wave of heroic destruction finally arrives. It violently crashes down with tremendous strength and ultimately causes everything to drown in emotion. All that have taken the devastating impact are now brought with sadness, pain, suffering, sorrow, despair, pleading for help, begging for mercy, and therefore left unable to move on. It increases those immensely powerful levels of emotion until everything is slaughtered and mercilessly ravaged by an evil presence summoning forth to manipulate the scene, so sudden and abrupt that a screech of agony can be heard repeatedly, as if something is invading a person's mind and desperately trying to fight back against its attacker. But it eventually succeeds. I have never heard anything so emotionally powerful like this before in my entire life. Rundus Battle is a soundtrack that I have since kept close to myself for a long time because of how much this fight means to me, as well as nailing everything on the goddamn mark for defining the scene between the protagonist and their hero dueling against each other in the most painfully emotional and conflicting scenario where everything remains hopeless and grows more worse at every turn. Left with no other choice but to pull the trigger on the one who was no longer the same person they once knew, ending their suffering and forced to put an end to their misery. It will always stay true to me as my overall favorite soundtrack because of how much insurmountable power it wields to define and achieve all of this on a spiritual level. And no other soundtrack in the entire library of video games will ever manage to replace with what this truly represents in deep meaning behind both the idea of Rundus as a character and the dreaded experience that carries out in maximum rectified and ethereal proportions during the fight. Because to clarify,
I don't like this fight at all. But at the same time, I've always come to admire it as a memorable Metroid experience that gets to me for what it means to move on, regardless if I utterly refuse to accept. It's a hard thing to endure in life, but in the end, you'll succeed without them. That's what this fight really means to me, and it's perfect. As much as it seems that I am forever indebted to everything about Rundus, it's still not enough to give out an excellent Metroid boss experience. So let's invite the excitement back one last time.
My scans have detected a presence so foreboding and enigmatic that it invokes a familiarity program beckoning across the darkest of quintessence, draining life without end. Even whilst I navigate through and about the desolated prodigy of ancient ruins etched with avian intellect and their tragic history, the dead, quiet ambience gives me a sign most unsettling. That it's as if the gift of self-awareness I've been entrusted is envisioning a foreshadowing event. The noises. They continue to echo within the lifeless atmosphere, spreading like a virus, adapting, controlling, speaking. It feels so digital, mysterious, advanced. And after initiating multiple dimensional atomic travel sequences, the answer is now clear. Since the beginning of the Prime Legacy, it was none other than the work of the Sanctuary Sentinel. Was this a coincidence? No. It's destiny. The noises have beckoned to follow where it's leading me. It was all but a trick, and I fell for its trap. But my actions were deliberate. I acknowledge myself to submit upon the Mastermind's authority. At this very moment, after 9 entries, I have finally reached the jackpot.
A lot of you may have already seen this one coming, but I can't help but give my highest honor to everyone in the community that understands what Quadraxis is widely known for as one of the greatest boss fights in all of gaming. And agreeing to this statement could not feel any more correct as one that subjectively represents it as factual. No fucking question. Quadraxis is built with all the needed specifications to obtain that golden standard. More than enough to where no other boss in the entire series can manage to withstand against its subliminal design. And by design, I literally mean the entire fucking blueprint that was forged from Retro Studios' inspirationally amazing sense of creativity. In the outset of Origin, Quadraxis was modeled and created by the Luminoth as their main line of defensive security measures to utilize for protection against their ordeal cast by the Ing. The untold amount of damage caused by the war on planet Aether were so devastating that the chances for victory plummeted almost entirely down to impossible. And so it became most ideal for them to enable highly advanced technological prowess built into Quadraxis' combat systems, fully optimized in order to guard their planetary energy for stabilization in Sanctuary Fortress, and eliminate any hostile intruders for what they dare to seek. However, this decision unfortunately took a dramatically horrific turn for the worst possible outcome that the Luminoth could ever bear to witness. Since during that time, the Ing's intelligence for possessing biology suddenly began to evolve as the aim toward technology-based life forms as the next stage following their dreaded lifeless scheme for an indominant civilized massacre, and ultimately after the entire universe, therefore increasing their numbers to tremendous heights even further way beyond reckoning. Learning this substantial increase of light-consuming wisdom, the Ing retaliated at full force, turning the tides with every weapon programmed to exterminate them,
now swear allegiance to the side without a mind of peace or a heart of mercy. Life was dying, hope grew dim, survival was critical, and light was destroyed. Once the Ing finally reached to the temple, with the help of possessive capabilities honed at maximum intervals, the large security drone was lost of its original core processing systems, taken to Dark Aether, and thus Quadraxis was remodified and became a quintessential state-of-the-art guardian that now serves supreme loyalty and order by the tribe of darkness that commands it, inside Holy Fortress's afterimage, which they come to call in their world the Hive. And with little to no effort, Sanctuary Fortress has fallen to the enemy. And once you enter inside the ominous realm of a ravenous, bloodthirsty dimension where darkness breeds, the Ing Hive is coated in a sentient biomass of corruptively deformed technological realterization, leaking with swarms of grubs, workers, carpenters, and drones pulsating from within the abyss of eternal evil and constricts inside the corridors. 3 crimson gems hold the emanated energy essence required to unlock the trial's gateway, leading to take back what's being heavily guarded. Once all 3 keys are obtained, the trial gate will open and a separate doorway will unfold to allow essential preparation. On the other side, witness from high above, lies the Luminoth's greatest creation, but not any longer. Now officially known as the Ing's secret weapon, placed inside the Ing Hive temple outskirts, where it rests motionless, system set offline and remains inactive. While descending or jumping off the lift platform, you can really feel and understand how damn powerful Quadraxis is as a living gigantic sign of warning just by looking at it. And yet, it's there, right in front of your vision. Threat scans will not be detected until you approach further and gaze directly right in front of it. The size of Quadraxis alone is so dreadfully imposing that it gives those intense feelings that it could reactivate at any given moment when times are least expected. An eventfully foreboding scene of imagination that is starting to begin. An enormous liquefied puddle of formed Ing possession suddenly appears everywhere beneath Quadraxis, slowly crawling around every part of its body before finally sinking in all at once, and thus restores power to its circuits, processing at maximum efficiency, regaining stabilization, combat systems engaged, locked and loaded. The fight with the titanic colossal rogue security unit has now commenced in full luxury. And oh my god, the setting of Quadraxis' entirety is so unbelievably intense. Size is definitely one factor of brilliant importance to jot down, quite possibly the largest in the entire series to date. But realistically speaking, the whole goddamn scenario taking effect for a gigantic robot guardian reprogrammed into a machine of war, wielding the premise of being deadlocked onto your sights at all times without breaking the slightest contact off of you, feels like as if it's analyzing your abilities to search for a weakness and acts like it knows what you're going to do. But this fucking display of pure malicious intimidation shoots through the fabric of reality by the fact of there being absolutely no safe zones present to rely on protection, meaning you are left completely exposed to Dark Aether's toxic atmosphere. Whether if you get hit or not, your life essence is insidiously being erased. These borderline intimidating specifications especially goes double with the music that occurs. I absolutely love Quadraxis' theme. Not only does it have limitless potential for soundtrack mashups and goes with literally everything, I wish I was exaggerating, but it is also one of the most ingeniously composed boss battle music in this series that goes so damn perfectly with the idea of Quadraxis' qualities as the Ing's ultimate weapon of war that bows and worships it as an accolade being presented in the background of Dark Aether. Mechanized grinding percussion, pounding drums, and robotic noises molded together for slow reactivation while it continuously powers up and goes back down, casting an ominous group of dark vocals expelling their voices in the vicinity like they are more than ready to witness and prepare for what has started to begin. Both sides sharpen in high levels of magnitude for the first phase of mechanical buildup, adding more quantified diversity built with power until it escalates at a larger scale by including the primordial classic Metroid Prime sound font effect, equivalent to the sound of an industrial-based hammer slamming against an anvil as it suddenly crashes through the air in an echoed alarm, forging deeper in mechanical buildup, causing it to summon a third line of vocals expelling in a higher tone. It's an act of praise and valuable worship. All systems have been brought back to life, and then it starts to analyze, search, scan, detect for any unwanted intruders around the area, fully functioning once more, and then everything starts to combine into one, consumes the atmosphere in everlasting darkness, building extra depth to increase the elemental quality of ominous energy, until finally the high-toned vocals emerge forth and invokes the rest to harmonize in glory and admiring worship. Standing tall, spoken in power and glory, greatness has awakened. Hear thy name, and so it shall be remembered. Quadraxis, the Ing's secret weapon of chaos, has been manifested. Combining all three of these factors for the setting speaks with tremendous volume at the sheer intensity Quadraxis gives off while you are engaged with it. But believe me when I say that this is only the front of the blueprints. The backside is where the truest of all details is written. And holy fucking shit, the ingenuity that's built into this fight is insane! As it begins, Quadraxis will constantly rotate its leg components around itself, while performing a minimum of weaponized combat actions to attack you. Missile launchers that home in directly toward your location, turret lasers that sweep across the room in a horizontal arc, triple potent bursts of matter-antimatter energy with auto-seeking capabilities, and creates one to multiple shock waves of electricity spreading across the surface in a large radius, generated through the dark pulsating energy cores located on its feet joints, which can be destroyed via the boost ball to permanently disable the attack. The process of removing these cores, however, will not deal any damage done to Quadraxis. The main primary target that should be focused on to attack is the 4 weak points located on the knees. At first rate for opposition, the structures around these spots appears to be virtually indestructible, since any charge or missile will cause them to bounce off and do nothing, but will only deal damage if the outline around them is flashing blue for a brief moment, indicating vulnerability, therefore turning red upon impact. After it's introduced with a couple of missiles, the outer exterior will blow up,
and Quadraxis will take damage. This process will cause the energy cores to re-enable back to per usual statuses and allow more attacks assembled to Quadraxis' arsenal, making it more excessively dangerous. These attacks include a powerful vortex spin that takes a few rounds of ammo or spherical turbo thrusters to break free from its powerful connection, pulling you in like a magnet, and a charged energy blast of matter-antimatter that now locks on and gains the ability to temporarily stun you, and even causes the audio to slightly deafen out because of how strong the blast is. Both do their part in a cycle to immobilize and distract you from laying the line of concentrated focus on the latter astute weak points if the precision is not well timed or if you're not in range of combat trajectory. Since in the middle of this sequence, the undamaged leg components will be mixed up and scattered with the other broken ones each time when Quadraxis finishes its attack cycle. Once you have the timing and precise actions nailed down for rinse and repeat, Quadraxis will start to lose control of its main body and extract its head module to resume terminal operations, leaving behind its damaged body in the center of the arena, while Quadraxis hovers around and unleashes its attacks as per usual protocol. This time, an indestructible barrier will be initiated and encased around its structure for high defense. And this is where the fight starts to get very interesting, because the damaged body of Quadraxis does seem to serve no valid purpose of use anymore. But in actuality, it is still remaining active and connected to the main core unit. Initiate the Echo Visor, obtained back from the second Dark Samus battle, and you will notice a giant transmitter extending on the top, while emitting sound frequencies supplying power to the barrier around the head. Severing the connection brought from the transmitter will leave Quadraxis stunned and reveal 3 receiver antennas protruding out of the head module. Dismantling these receivers will damage Quadraxis and cause it to deploy one of its Dark Quad Sentry units sent after you as a slight diversion to reassemble the transmitter on its body and reactivate the barrier once more. What I find the most extremely interesting about this sequence is the fact that you basically need to enter another dimension to actually locate the weak points just for the premise of figuring out how to damage it. That sounds so crazy to believe, but it's essentially the case. Okay, where were we? Oh, yeah, of course. Once all transceivers are removed, the damage done to its connection interferences causes a chain reaction to the head and breaks the glass casing around it. Then it erratically flies around with barely any function to maintain stability and crashes all over against its already damaged body, removes the base armor from the leg components, and in major conveniences, its uncontrollable actions has revealed the magnetic railing devices for the astute climactic finisher. As for the head module, left exposed and officially rendered defenseless at last. And this is where the absolute genius comes into play. Once Quadraxis is wide open for concentrated weapon fire depositions, the unit will be stunned for a much longer duration and start to circle around its damaged body. Pay attention to which direction it's rotating and climb on the magnetic rails with the spider ball ability. Wait for it to approach on the leg component that you're rested on, initiate the boost ball, and launch yourself onto the stunned head module. Cling to its now magnetic surface and deploy a morph ball bomb inside the circular indentations located on each hemisphere, igniting in flames and one weak point close to utter demolishment. After deploying the last bomb, Quadraxis will lose all control of flight, slowly descending to the ground, and Samus jumps off, exits out of morph ball mode, slows her momentum, and nails a perfect landing, while the head module loses function in the background before exploding into a million pieces. And the mad AI Quadraxis is forevermore shut down. Okay, allow me to go back for emphasis just to see if I got everything from this final sequence. Retro, you have literally shown the genius from this so much that after Quadraxis is stunned, we need to use itself against itself by gaining the upper hand, or leg, to launch ourselves on the head while it's stunned as the epic final blow for a Metroid boss fight. I can hardly believe what I am saying right now. This is unlike anything I have ever experienced before or since I began playing the Metroid series. And to think that it all started from Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, the most innovative and fucking incredible video game sequel I have ever laid my eyes on and grasped its luxury with my hands in awe-filled luxury. The tip of the iceberg for discovering the rest of the bosses in this amazing franchise all turned out to be the bottom of it all. Grapple Guardian, Spider Guardian, Amorbus, Chica, Dark Samus, Emperor Ing, and fucking Quadraxis! All of these bosses were my first impression to the series. But this reinstates every formal characteristic of what makes a boss fight so goddamn enjoyable. Innovation, derivation, creativity, transcendent ingenuity! My excitement levels may be speaking clearly enough as it is, but I have all the more reasons to explain why I fucking love the Quadraxis fight. The lore makes it sound so intense to believe that when you arrive, this monumental machine of war is ways above your league. The design of it all, from the boss itself and the stages from fighting it, is astonishingly unique. This fight takes the term quality over quantity and succeeds with both. The concept of literally and figuratively dissecting it piece by piece, dividing all of its forms into legitimate segments and breaking them down into analyzable data from the scan visor is pure fucking genius. And because of that, since it's a conflict of man against machine, you fighting a highly advanced, rogue colossal-sized tool of war built at insurmountable intervals of artificial intelligence, and requires yourself to be intelligent by unleashing your entire arsenal to show who is the superior model of intelligence. It's thrilling, it's exciting, and it's worth with tremendous value for everything it delivers as a boss in a video game. And it is so rewarding because the matter-antimatter weapon it used to own now bears the mark of your outstanding accomplishment. The Annihilator Beam. Everything about Quadraxis, from design, concept, lore, setting, music, fight, prospect, presentation, and reward is complete. A legendary golden fucking standard badass Metroid boss battle. The Ing stolen masterpiece as the greatest kind in Metroid for the concept of destroying one. Quadraxis, your blueprints are sacred. This has been GBA049. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next mission.